Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Bringing you another 2-hour-long compilation video to enjoy on this Sunday. So if you're listening with headphones, again, that's great. And if you're alone, even better. So sit back, relax, be sure to subscribe, and enjoy. What's the most compelling paranormal thing you've experienced? Did it change your worldview? Serious. My grandma's boyfriend passed away, and my mom and I traveled to Florida to help her make the arrangements. My grandma had a 2-bedroom condo in a gated community, so my mom took the second bedroom and I took the couch. I woke up at 4:19 a.m. and heard old-timey music. Figured my grandma was awake early and tried to go back to sleep. Then I heard shuffling down the hall. Figured my mom was going to the bathroom. But then I heard someone sigh and sit down in a leather recliner next to the couch that he always sat in. I immediately knew it was him. Later in the day, we visited his kids, not related to us, and my mom kept trying to get me to tell his oldest daughter. I told my mom I didn't want to upset her. She overheard and asked me to tell her, so I explained what happened. Her eyes got all wide, and she looked at her husband. Apparently, her husband woke up in the middle of the night, looked straight at her, and told her father was there and that he was okay. That wasn't my first experience with the paranormal, but certainly one I could never forget. I managed to work at 2 haunted movie theaters. The first theater I worked at was a decently old building. I started working there during the summer and my friend got me the job. During the summer day shift, we would usually have 3 people working the ticket booth and concession stand, and having no customers was pretty common if no good movies were released that week. One of my first shifts was with my friend who got me the job and a woman who I'll call Jerry for the story. Since we were absolutely dead and had a lot of downtime since all the movies were showing, Jerry decided to take a nap in one of the empty theaters that had no customers. My friend and I stayed behind the concession stand just in case any customers came in and to talk about video games and nonsense. Jerry goes to theater 2. We were talking for about 15 minutes when Jerry comes out of theater 2 pissed off and tells us to stop messing with her and that she was really tired and just wanted to sleep. I tell her that we were out here talking the entire time and that no one went into the theater. She doesn't believe us and just tells us to let her sleep. She goes back into the theater. About 20 minutes later, she comes out again, pissed off, and yells at us to stop shaking the back of the seat she was sleeping in. She said that it felt like someone grabbed her seat and shook it with all their force. We told her again that it wasn't us, and she decides to not go back into the theater she was sleeping in. After that, my coworker told me rumors about the theater being haunted, usually some nonsense about murders that happened there a long time ago or a dead body found in the bathroom. Of course, there was no evidence to back that up, but it was fun to talk about. Occasionally, you had the feeling of being watched while cleaning theaters, but that seemed expected since you're in these giant, dark rooms. However, the experience that I had while opening made me believe that the theater was haunted. I was working an opening shift, where it's just you and the manager. These usually happened on weekdays when we knew we were going to be slow. All 3 managers of the theaters were known for being late for a variety of reasons. The head manager was just lazy and smoked a lot of weed. The other manager had to take the bus, which was always unpredictable. And the third manager really didn't have an excuse for being late, but since the other 2 were always late, it seemed okay. Because they were always late, we had the idea of giving a key to the restaurant next door so that the worker who had to open could get into the building without having to wait for the manager. When I arrived, I got the key next door, opened the door, and went inside. When opening, the first thing you had to do was turn the lights on in the electrical room. To get to the electrical room, you had to get through a door with a keypad. When you opened that door, there was a staircase that led to the manager's office. To the left, on the bottom of the stairs, was the electrical room. I opened the door, saw that the manager's office door was closed, so I go into the electric room and turn the lights on. As I'm leaving the electrical room, I hear from the manager's office, "Hey yo, Watership Down 82, what's good?" It sounded like my manager with a very deep, distinct voice, and that's how he always greeted me. I yelled back up, "You knew I was opening. Why didn't you keep the door open for me?" And I went about my opening duties. I just finished making the popcorn when my manager walks in and says, "Hey yo, Watership Down 82. Sorry I'm late." I told him, "When did you sneak out?" He asked me what I was talking about, and I told him that I heard him upstairs before. He then tells me that his bus was 40 minutes late, and he had just got there. He made me go upstairs with him to check that no one was hiding up there. There wasn't anyone there. I worked at that theater for about 2 years before the company decided to close it down because the building owner wanted to raise the rent. They transferred all the workers to other close by theaters, and I was transferred to a theater that was in the town over. I knew the theater, and I knew that the theater was old, very old. So old that it was grandfathered in with not being handicap accessible for some of the theaters. My first day there, I was asked to clean one of the upstairs theaters. Being the new guy, I obviously said yes and went up there to clean it. The theaters were small enough that one person could clean it on their own. I go up to this theater, and as soon as I walk in, I felt that I was in danger. I checked the aisles to make sure that everyone left and that no one was hiding in there to try and sneak a second free movie or worse. It was empty, but the feeling of being in danger never left. As I was cleaning, I had a feeling that there was something in there watching me, and I knew where it was. It was in the back corner of the theater, where the light didn't illuminate it. I felt as if it was watching me, and was waiting for me to get distracted so it could push me down the stairs in the theater. I quickly cleaned the theater as fast as I could and got out of there. Every single time I went into that theater, I had the same feeling. That was it watching me in the corner and wanted to hurt me. Eventually, I told my coworkers that I couldn't clean that theater by myself and that someone needed to come with me. Surprisingly, everyone was fine with this. The thing that really sold this for me was that a worker who was away at college came home for the summer and started picking up shifts at the theater. I never met him before, but the first shift that he came back for, he went to the same theater to clean it and came back down 2 minutes later and told us that he wasn't cleaning that theater because he felt that someone was watching him and he didn't get paid enough to deal with demons. After that, my coworker told me stories about their experiences. One manager saw a little girl in the stockroom, another heard voices coming from the stockroom, another saw the bathroom stall doors swing and slam open by themselves, another would see people sitting in the seats in the theater who would disappear when they blinked. A closing manager heard footsteps and laughing in the lobby hours after we closed. No one knew why exactly, but we figured that the building was so old, some people must have died there. Friend always said he had a haunted house, and adjacent woods said some wild stories that I never seriously thought to be true. During a sleepover, he commented on seeing floating balls of light. I was the only one when everyone went to bed, then felt weird and looked into the dining room. I saw a floating ball of light, which then rapidly expanded without a single sound and briefly blinded me. It expanded slower than light should have. I have no idea what it was, some kind of phenomenon maybe. It mostly made me consider all the other stories he said that were much more extreme, like weird cryptids in the forest. He never said them in a manner that seemed joking or the like, just idle information. Didn't change much. My sister and I were watching TV in my room when this black sphere, a little smaller than a basketball, appeared right below my ceiling. We didn't yell or run away, we watched it. Very slowly it moved down until it went past the foot of my bed, so we couldn't see it anymore. We looked at each other and then we jumped up and ran downstairs. Another time, same house. My friend had slept over. In the morning, we were laying in bed talking about where we wanted to get breakfast. As we're talking, a big bottle of cocoa butter that I had on my vanity mirror moved forward across the vanity about 6 inches and then shot to the floor. My friend immediately asked if we could go downstairs, LOL. That house was built in the 1840s, and we had so many experiences there. Even my stepdad did, and before that, he didn't really believe in that stuff. I was at a bar about 8 years ago, had a pretty good buzz going, and I walked down the hallway to the restroom, and around the corner comes a little boy. He was maybe 6 or 7. He had on black pants and a white button-down shirt, and he had short dark hair. Now it's 1 a.m, and there's a little kid in the bar. He stopped when he saw me and just looked at me. I said, "Hey buddy, are you here with someone?" And he got this really shocked look on his face and vanished. Like, he didn't move. He disappeared. However, as I mentioned, I'd been drinking, so I just blew it off. Cut to 6 months later. I started bartending at the bar. I was working day shift, and when the owner came in at 4 p.m., I told him that I didn't know there was an apartment above the bar, and it must suck to have to listen to the bar all night, especially with little kids. He asked me what the hell I was talking about. I told him I'd been listening to the kids upstairs playing and laughing and running around all day. He walked me up to the second floor. It's not an apartment. It's a huge, empty room. One night, I was closing the bar at 3:30 in the morning, and I went to the bathroom before I left. I was the only one there, and the doors were locked. I hear knocking on the bathroom door and a little kid giggling. No one was there when I opened the door. That Christmas, I bought a rubber ball and a toy truck and a doll and left them upstairs in the empty room. For the next several months, I would hear the ball bouncing across the wooden floor upstairs while I was working. It made me smile. They were just kids. At least they finally had some toys. Not necessarily paranormal, but I was waiting at a stoplight about to turn left. The light turned green and normally I would just go, but for some reason I hesitated for like 5 seconds and just sat there as cars behind me honked. I looked to my left and a semi barrels through the intersection. If I would have gone, I was dead. It's like my mind just blanked and something stopped me from going. Pretty creepy. My dad had a workshop in the basement. I was in bed sleeping and all of a sudden I heard some tools going off downstairs. I was trying to figure out why on earth my dad would be down there so late at night, so I went to get up to investigate. As I passed by his room, I heard him snore. He was fast asleep. Also, he's deaf, so no way he was waking up from the noise. Needless to say, I ran back to bed and pulled the covers over my head. My family also experienced a bunch of odd stuff in that house, like the workshop door handle jiggling or seeing a figure in the darkness. Even had our dog break into the house via the tiny basement window, shattering it and jumping the 8 feet to get in. That basement definitely had something going on, and I've absolutely hated being in basements by myself ever since. Sorry for the length. I haven't really ever told anyone this story, and I guess it's kind of cathartic. Bit of background first. My 6-month-old nephew, Ken, not his real name, died of SIDS when I was 11. It was the first time I'd experienced the death of a loved one, and while it affected me for years, it was also the catalyst for me becoming an atheist because it basically took away my ability to believe in any kind of constructive metaphysical power. The rest of my family would often talk about how Ken had come to them in dreams or left them signs, e.g. his favorite song playing on the radio. His mom spoke to psychics who claimed they could sense his presence, etc., etc. What I'm saying is that they were all open to the idea that he still existed on some plane, but I couldn't get any comfort from that because my reality was that he was dead and gone. Anyway, cut to my 20s, and a few other loved ones die, and generally my life is in a pretty shit place for other reasons, and one night on my own, I was feeling utterly hopeless. I'd begun self-injuring at that point, but that was my last coping mechanism I had left, and tonight it wasn't making a difference. I actually really strongly considered, for the first time, that there may not actually be a way out of this constant misery. Then, completely out of nowhere, I absolutely felt Ken's presence and the unconditional love that babies give you. It scared the fuck out of me because it was honestly a physical sensation of someone being in the room with me. Mental illness runs in my family, and I thought now I was schizophrenic on top of everything else. I 100% knew it was Ken though, and feeling that he loved me made me think there had to be something in me worth loving. So I had to keep going till I found it because that's what would save me. To this day, I have no effing idea what happened that night. I've never felt anything like it in the 20 or so years since then, and I know I wasn't consciously thinking about him beforehand. It's entirely possible my subconscious just concocted the whole thing as a Hail Mary, and that's obviously the more likely answer, but I can't shake how utterly certain I was that it was him. I didn't have to convince myself of it because he was just there. I've had other random spooky shit or weird coincidences come up through my life, but that night is the only time that it genuinely felt like a supernatural thing had happened to me. What's the most compelling paranormal thing you've experienced? Did it change your worldview? Serious. Part 2. I've always believed in the paranormal. Years ago, I lived in this house, and we would hear bangs upstairs and we would run upstairs. Then upstairs, we would hear one downstairs. Sometimes we would come up home to find the fridge is sideways, or the chairs are all pulled out and doors open. The TV, lamps, and other stuff would be unplugged. This other time, my brother was laying in bed, his story, and felt pressure on his legs, as if somebody was sitting on the bed, on his legs. He said there was an actual bump in the sheets, where he felt it too. Glad we moved, LOL. So way back in 2004, I was living with my grandparents after moving to their city. I have a large family, and many of my cousins have lived with them at some point. My grandparents were well off financially, and lived on a large 100-plus-year-old house, so space and money weren't an issue. Anyways, at that point I had a job with a large retail company that involved travel, lots of it. Trips lasted from several weeks to months gone. I basically left my stuff at my grandparents while I was gone. On this particular trip, I was heading home from Ohio with a layover in Texas. I had this overwhelming need to call my grandparents to remind them I was coming home, but this trip involved an 80-hour work week, not including the flight time. so I never made the call. When we landed in Texas, I had 45 missed calls and voicemails on my phone, all from family. My grandfather had killed himself in the backyard about 45 minutes after I had decided to not call. I stumbled out of the plane and proceeded to put down shots until the bartender cut me off. A coworker found me and made sure I got on the plane. My parents picked me up once I got home. I told my grandma I would stay as long as she wanted. I was due to move into an apartment in 3 weeks after that trip. That night, after she went to bed, I went into my room, the family referred to as the Red Room, as at one point it had this red flocked wallpaper above the wood paneling. This room is where my grandfather spent most of his time. It had a fireplace next to where he would sit and read. He was a voracious reader, and only would sit in his chair. So I sat in a rocking chair across from where he would sit, and I bawled for hours. I talked to him like he was there. When I got up to go to bed, I stood up and touched his chair. It was warm, as if someone was sitting there for hours. Now mind you, this is a leather chair, and it was warm in the area where he would have sat only. Other parts were cool to the touch, as you would expect. I had massive guilt for years for not calling, and to this day, I cannot explain why the seat was warm. There isn't a logical explanation. I was home with my brother one night. I live on a farm. We heard the dogs barking, and when I looked out the window, I saw what looked like a tall person wearing a hoodie walking toward my house. I thought it was my cousin and went down to greet him. When I got to the gate, there was no one there, but the dogs were still barking, very aggressively, with their backs arched like cats, and it seemed like they were following something with their gaze. That was getting closer to the gate. I ran back to my house and didn't look out again that night. Also, had an annoying experience where we lived in a rented flat in my grandma's house. We should lose things, wallets, watches, jewelry, and then, days after, they'd appear in the same spot, somewhere we were logically would never leave that stuff. It didn't change my worldview that much since I've had some paranormal experiences my entire life, but it made me a little fearful/respectful about stuff that can't be explained. Never made fun of the paranormal again. Woke to being choked. Computer light showed wispy hands that went into the wall, footsteps on carpet that sounded like walking on wood, door closed, and saw knob turn. TV shut off as soon as I sat down repeatedly. Flies appear in the house, hundreds of them. Hard smell, cold spots. Things like keys moved, finding cabinet doors open when I get up. Creepy feeling. So glad to be out of that house. Damn, where do I start with this one? I have a few stories that really changed my view on the paranormal. There are times where I'll be jamming out to music and I'll feel the vibrations of someone walking through the house, and I'll remove one of my earphones and listen for anything and ask if my sister or dad is home. It's a 50-50 chance that I'll get a reply back or not, so I learn to ignore it and go back to jamming out to music and working. But the stuff that screws me up the most is when I get a tug on my hoodie and I have to pull my hoodie back so I'm not choking, only to have it get tugged again. Sometimes I'll hear someone call my name and I'll look around and ask them what, and I'll never get a reply. It doesn't help I'm home alone often. I'm pretty sure everyone sees something run by in the corner of their eye, but what you don't see every day is someone poking their head out of your room in the dark and run in and out of your room. Sometimes all the lights in my room will flicker, and I'll ask whoever is doing that to just stop, and it randomly stops, and I'm always like, thanks. I'm just confused half the time. There was one time I woke up randomly in the night to a painting my sister did, flying off my wall and onto the floor. So like a normal person, I get up and put it back on my wall, scroll on my phone for a bit, and try to go back to sleep. Apparently any time I would try to go back to sleep, the painting will fly off the wall again. I didn't get to sleep till 6 a.m. Another instance is when I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and there was a random old lady just standing there. I just turned around and just walked back to my room. I'll never forget the sight of her just standing in the shadows of the bathroom staring back at me. Couldn't see her face that well since it was dark, but I could tell that it was an old woman, not the best of nights. Seeing this random cat in the house when I pass by doorways. I have 3 other cats in the house, but none of them have this ginger tan coat. I would always back up and look into the room to see nothing there and just shrug it off as my imagination. Only seen it 2 to 3 times. I'm pretty sure it's my pet cat's brother or sister that my dad accidentally hit with his car when I was little. I think it was my aunt that caused the house to get haunted since she played on a Ouija board in my sister's room before either one of us was born. She still refuses to sleep in that room after a nightmare she had in there. It doesn't help that she said a black hooded figure ran at her before she woke up, because when I slept in there, in the corner of that stupid room, it's just a random shadow person with a hood staring at me and slowly moving around the room. I woke up once with the thing standing directly over me while my sister slept on the bottom bunk. I just sort of waved at it, and it stared at it for a bit before I went back to sleep. Saw it most nights I slept in that room and just shrugged it off from me being tired until my aunt told that story. I don't know. I just learned to live with this, and it's been a part of my life for ages. My sisters hate the paranormal, and they always make jokes about me befriending random ghosts in the house. My dad saw the one that literally runs in and out of my room and had a full-blown freakout when I texted him to keep the door open so the ghost can just run in and out of my room. He ended up sleeping at my stepmom's house that weekend I was gone. It was pretty funny to me, but he was pretty terrified. Worked security for a local security company that was just starting up and specialized in monitoring heavy levee equipment out in the orchards. I had no radio, no gun, no mace, no flashlight, and no phone service. I was strictly there to monitor and take notes. But if anything did happen, the nearest help was 30 to 45 minutes away in town. Fast forward to a few weeks of night shifts along the levee, with it being surrounded by orchards, and I was pretty comfortable at my new location with its one road in and one road out as the only entrance for a few miles. It was about 02:30 in the morning when I hear an alarm clock going off somewhere in the murky darkness. I'm positioned alongside the levee in this position, with my car being the 0 on the right and the levee as the plus and the alarm sound coming from the O on the left. I turn my car on and drive over to the levee to where the workers had a portable office container with a few chairs and a table set up and where it sounded like the alarm is coming from. As my dim high beams started to sweep across the orchard, I see a dark figure, multiple rows back, seem to fade behind a tree quickly. I stop there and stare into the darkness, barely disrupted by my POS car's headlights. Nothing moves, and I can hear the alarms still going off, so I get out of my car and using my phone's light, I find the culprit sat upon a white plastic table. A single, small, square battery-powered alarm clock was singing away as my brain screamed at me to return to my car. I quickly popped the batteries out of the alarm and hopped back in my car as the silence returned to the orchards. As I was reversing out of the spot, my headlights bathed the trees in light again, and the same similar shape was now 3 or 4 rows closer, and this time it seemed to crouch down behind a tree. I sat there for a moment longer, staring into the void before my brain screeched, "What if there's more and this is the distraction?" That thought encouraged me to back up onto the high part of the levee, and there I waited for the next 3.5 hours alone. It felt torturous, like 1,000 eyes were burrowing into every square inch of my car and soul from every angle. The quietness of an orchard is something very unsettling in the wintertime, as there's no insects or wildlife wandering about. All I could hear was silence, and my pounding heart for the next 3.5 hours of my shift. I almost wanted some monster to come tearing through the trees, bellowing out, "Ha ha, here I am, here to eat you." But instead I saw and heard nothing more. My morning shifter shows up late and starts casually drinking his hot cup of coffee as I give him the rundown, while the sun starts to peek into the sky. I still remember the stream trail from his mug and the chirping of early birds as we decided to investigate further into the orchard. We ended up at the spot where I saw the figure, and after some quick scanning, he ended up spotting some really large footprints from boots that seemed to pace back and forth in a line along one row of trees. We then tracked them as they led forward towards the worker's office container and abruptly stopped near a tree, while still a few rows back. Nothing more. No follow-up footprints leading forward or backwards. No vehicle tracks leading out of the dirt. No one could have gotten past me without trudging through the orchard. It was as if someone appeared, paced back and forth in a line for a few hours, walked forward, and then just disappeared without another step. We reported it to the boss, and he shrugged it off, saying maybe it was an elaborate prank by the construction workers, but that was one of the last shifts I worked during security. Definitely made me more of a believer in the paranormal kind of things. Ghost Hunters of Reddit, what was your scariest experience yet, and why? Not scary, more funny, but my wife is an aspiring, extremely amateur ghost hunter, and she once thought it a great idea to download a thermal camera app on her phone to maybe locate cold spots of a spirit she's convinced inhabits our residence. She was super excited to see how intensely cold our dark closet was, and that's where it must reside. No amount of argument could convince her a smartphone, no matter how smart, will not read heat signature, until I told her to turn off the lights, and suddenly everything, including us, read just as cold as the dark closet. Since there are no true ghost hunter responses, here's my ghost story, if you even call it that. I was roughly 8 years old, living in the hills of Appalachian, Tennessee, near Norris Lake. We had a 2-story house, the basement with garage, fireplace and wood storage, utility room with laundry. Second story had the kitchen, living room, 3 bedrooms, and 1 bath. My dad was a single parent working at the metal factory. My sister was 3 years older than me and at a different school. We were the only 3 people living in the house. One day, near summertime, she had school and I didn't. I, unfortunately, had to stay home by myself. I was in the living room. I just made and ate some microwave food and walked into the living room to watch cartoons. As I lay on the couch, I noticed this, for lack of better description, formless, semi-transparent white thing enter the room from the basement. It moved fast, and it was noiseless. It did not interact with anything in the room. I froze and couldn't move. It circled around the ceiling 5 to 6 times before retreating to the back hallway. I told my sister when she came home, but she didn't believe me. I don't remember bringing it up with Dad. That was the only time I've had anything close of an encounter with a ghost. Even then, I still blame my alone child mind. It could have been anything. It wasn't enough of an experience to make me believe. I still don't believe. I want to, but nothing has given solid proof that they do. I've even been into some pretty interesting places. As a police officer, I was called to an abandoned psychiatric facility. 2 kids were seen going in and never came out. Went inside. All the equipment had been removed and it was just graffiti and vandalized doorways left. Never found those kids, but also never found a ghost. Had a 911 call from an abandoned warehouse once, which happens apparently. No phone line, no power, nothing set up, and the address was correct. Could have been a dispatcher messing with me, but I believe it was just a disturbance in the existing taps to the property. My team was investigating the Burlington County Prison in New Jersey, a unnerving place. Has a huge painted eye over the door into the cells that says, "We are watching you," over it. Has mannequins in cells, very weird vibe. We are science and IT and photography types. I battle myself and everyone, despite having had paranormal experiences personally, that it is impossible to capture evidence of these events. I don't think we have any means to adequately measure these experiences in science and think they're purely personal. Anyway, we had everything. Sound recorders everywhere. We had full spectrum cameras. We had an Xbox laser grid that accurately mapped any moving, dense matter in a room in a 3D comp program. We had an ambulance, the Black Betty, that we ran everything into and converted into a home base. Pretty cool stuff. Anyway, we spent hours investigating the location and there was nothing. No experiences. It was dead. So we decided to pack up. We are split up. I'm on the first floor with another member. 2 members are on the middle floor, and another member is going into the basement to turn on the lights. We collect everything before we turn the lights on. Right as I turn off the last audio recorder, my friend gives the okay to switch on the power. Right as the lights go on, and we no longer have any recording or listening abilities, we hear a massive, earth-shaking crash. This place is a museum. Huge cases filled with objects from when the prison was active. This crash shook the floor. It sounded like a huge display case was pushed over and smashed. I could feel it in the ground below me. I could hear the glass smashing and scattering across the ground. I could feel the physics of it all. The sound of broken objects filled the whole prison. It came from below us. Fuck. Someone just broke something really expensive. We're never going to get to come back here. As we went down, the 2 people in the middle floor were rushing up. What happened up there? Nothing. What did you guys do? They couldn't understand why we thought it came from the middle floor. But that is where we heard and felt it. They heard and felt it come from our floor. They searched our floor, we searched their floor. The guy in the basement came upstairs in a rush, having heard the massive crash, come from the middle like us. For whatever reason, we all felt this happen on different floors. We all were certain we heard or felt the crash from the floor below or above us. We looked everywhere. There was nothing. Not a broken case, glass, window, nothing outside. I searched for an additional hour, just because I couldn't imagine something that massive sounding, that physical, just not leaving a trace. Really broke my brain. I could not for the life of me understand how this happened and left no evidence. I personally think the prison was fucking with us, because right before this happened, when we're finalizing the investigation and saying things like, "If you have something to say, now is your chance. We're going to leave soon," I joked to everyone and said, "Watch. Once we shut everything off, something crazy will happen." Well, I was right. It was utterly perplexing. The park rangers came in and looked too, found nothing. They called a week later to confirm nothing was broken. WTF. One time, a few friends and I were camping out overnight in a local campground and started telling scary stories. It was like 3 a.m. and we were pretty tired, so as we were about to go to bed, but out of nowhere, a bunch of crows started cawing like crazy for 10 minutes, and we had no idea what was going on. We decided to try moving our tent to a different location, but the noise seemed to be everywhere. Eventually, we just said whatever and tried to go to sleep. The noise quieted down, but then around 4 a.m. I heard this really strange whisper in my ear. I assumed it was one of my friends, but everyone looked asleep. I saw that our tent entrance was unzipped, and when I went to close it, I looked out and just saw this slightly glowing figure way out in the distance above the lake. I swear it was like some lady in a wedding dress, but I barely got a look. I was so terrified that I just zipped up the tent as fast as possible and went back to bed. It sounds pretty vanilla, but I'm so scared to look out of a window or something in the middle of the night and just see her again hovering, all still like. I go ghost hunting with my dad and neighbor. One time we went to my great-nan's grave. I had never met her. As soon as we arrived, all three of us started to feel pretty weird, so we sat down for the investigation by the grave. We set up all the voice recorders and EMF meters and started talking. Once my dad introduced me, I felt like something was touching me. My dad jokingly said, "Why not give him a hug?" But when he said that, I felt arms around my waist. My whole waist went cold and tight, but after a few seconds, it stopped. We decided to leave after that, although we kept hearing someone walking behind us until we left the graveyard. Heard this one from my grandma about my grandpa. He was in the army, walking back to his unit late at night when he found someone leaning back to a tree. Grandpa waved a hand at him and greeted him, but the guy didn't respond back. Grandpa looked closely at him and noticed the guy wasn't moving at all, so he freaked out and kept moving to his unit. Next morning, they found that the guy was hanged to that tree. Not a ghost hunter, but me and my buddy were, and still are, hardcore believers. Well, in our early 20s, we used to smoke pot and then play hide and seek in houses under construction. It was actually tons of fun. Pitch black, lots of places to hide and move around. Highly recommend, except I don't suggest doing what me and my buddy did, but hey, you do you. One night, we're done playing and start smoking another joint. It was 4 of our good friends, my said friend and myself. Me and my buddy convinced everyone to make a Ouija board since there was scrap wood and a permanent marker at this one table that the workers used. There were random papers and empty coffee cups and a water bottle. Well, we started asking questions to the Ouija board, but no one took it seriously, and we were just messing around. Everyone got bored pretty quick and went up to the street to smoke a dart. Me and my buddy stuck behind to do it seriously. I don't remember what we said, but we were very open and inviting. We apologized for our friends not being serious, and we expressed our desire to make contact very sincerely. It was like 5 sentences at least. Then we asked if anything is there, make yourself known. Then, immediately after, 3 loud as hell bangs, louder than I have ever heard, all rang out from around us. They were uniform and spread out over 3 to 4 seconds. Bang! 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 The sound seemed to be coming from inside the room we were in, which was the garage, which had a concrete floor and stucco walls, so it echoed like no other, but it didn't have a garage door. I have never experienced true fear like this, like a deep feeling that just twisted my gut and jumped up my throat. Hair on the back of my neck stood up, chills, and I felt cold. We looked up at each other. We both saw the legitimate ball shrinking fear in each other's faces. We both knew neither of us was messing around. We moved the tile to goodbye and ran out of the garage like two bats fleeing hell. We cheesed it up the steep-ass driveway to our friends who were almost done with their cigarettes. All 4 of them were present, all 4 of them smoking, and not one of them out of breath. There was no way anyone else was in that house since we had just played hide and seek in it for like 2 hours. We asked our friends if they heard any loud noises from the house. They didn't hear a goddamn thing. There was no way they wouldn't have heard what essentially were gunshots. They asked us why. We didn't really tell them anything because we knew they wouldn't believe us, and I knew if we told them they'd be like, let's go back and check it out. Hell no. We left immediately. For the rest of my life, I won't ever be in the same room as people playing Ouija or messing around with spells or pentagrams. I want nothing to do with that stuff. Whatever it was that made those noises that night was fucking angry, and I never want to feel that anger. Writing this gave me chills and hair standing on my neck again. I won't ever forget that night. I don't need to believe. I know. Used to go ghosting with friends and use Ouija boards all the time. When we were 16, we were fucking around inside a mausoleum at a cemetery, and when I climbed out, it felt like something blew in my face, scaring me, and I fell into a bush. Just thinking it was my imagination getting the best of me, I forgot about it until about a week later. I was back at my house and walking into my room. The lights were out, and I noticed it's just a bit darker on my bed, but didn't think much of it until I approached my bed, and the same scary-ass thing blew in my face again. I actually fell backwards, breaking my closet door, lol. Haven't ghosted since. I was ghost hunting at Kay's Cross in Utah, and one of the experiences there was when we were at the cross and got a really bad feeling, so we decided to leave. As we were leaving, we can hear footsteps behind us and to the sides of us about 15 feet away. I turn my head while walking, and I can see about a dozen shadow figures in the woods just watching us. One of my friends saw a couple, and the other didn't see anything. I'm not necessarily a ghost hunter, but I do enjoy urban exploring and venturing into the unknown, if you will. This particular story happened around 5 years ago or so. I still can't explain it. My friends and I were being dumb and reckless as we were around the age of 16. We decided it would be fun to grab a Ouija board and go to one of our favorite abandoned places. This abandoned place was an old insane asylum that we used to break into every weekend for the adrenaline rush. This asylum was 2 stories high. It was old and falling apart. There were also always rumors floating around our small town that it was extremely haunted. Anyway, we got in and sat down in the middle of the building on the 2nd floor. We began goofing off and moving the planchette, trying to be funny. In short, nothing immediately happened, and we all just began pranking each other and laughing our asses off. After it was all said and done, we foolishly got into our vehicles and drove home for the night. This is where it gets scary. This story is quite long, so I'll leave out some minor details. On my way home, I felt very fatigued and just worn out. Nothing new. I was a kid and I stayed out all night. Of course I'd be tired, right? Well, for the next month, I experienced very bizarre things that even I have a hard time believing. I would wake up most nights with scratches and bruises. The most prominent being a black bruise located on the back of my left upper arm. It was about the size of a baseball. Now I had zero recollection of how this might have occurred, and I was baffled. But I shrugged it off. I then began to notice very odd patterns and omens. 3 times during this month, I witnessed 3 owls fly directly at my car and disappear before impact. It scared me so bad, I'd jump and lose my breath. There were also times where I'd constantly feel watched and followed. I felt like my privacy was completely invaded. I began to stay up all night because I grew afraid. I felt like I was going crazy. My friends didn't believe me at first until they started noticing that odd things would happen when I was around. Things would go missing, then reappear. Random animals would act aggressive around me. And my friends even began developing scratches and bruises they couldn't explain either. At this point, it was near the end of the month, and I was entering a depression as I felt my feelings were very misunderstood. I finally found one girl who believed me and thought that I may have been hexed. Because I was young and dumb, I really didn't understand what this meant, or even if that was right. I was miserable for so long, and just a few days after speaking with this woman, everything changed. I don't know what happened, but the energy was lighter, and I felt that everything was normal again. I never woke up with scratches or bruises again, and although I see an occasional shadow figure every now and again, I can tell that whatever was happening to me had stopped. I'm 21 now, and still feel very puzzled by my experience, and I would love some additional insight. Not Ghost Hunter, not quite me either. I have worked doing installations in churches for 13 years. I went to meet my already working co-workers in an old sanctuary. They were freaked out when I got there and asked if I heard anything, which I did. There was some knocking and creaking above behind the stage. Turns out there were some closets and attic rooms we were planning on utilizing for some equipment. My coworker went up to a room inside the attic. A broom was in his way, leaning against the door, so he moved it aside against the wall. He went in, surveyed the area, then went to leave. The broom was in his way, standing on its bristles. He hit it aside and GTFO. There was no one else in the church at all, just us. We later found a handwritten cardboard sign in an unreachable place inside an underground air vent saying something about a friend dying, so that may have been unrelated but still added to the abnormality a bit. Not a ghost hunter remotely, but me and a few mates used to go down to an abandoned mental institution. We used to set up scenarios where we would hide and either make sounds or noises to freak the other person out, making crying baby noises, ghost sounds, etc. One time, we all went to the old nursing quarters. It was usually trashed. Windows boarded up with corrugated iron, broken glass, cupboards, and everything all broken up was the norm. This time, it looked like someone had either gone nuts with red paint but there was pentagram stuff everywhere, symbols on the ground. I totally thought some kids had been stupid, etc., just mucking around. We split up, and I went up the stairs with another friend, found a mutilated rabbit, and as we passed by the window, I heard a tap, tap on the boarded up corrugated iron window. I laughed and tapped back on it. Tap, tap, tip, tap, tap, shave and a haircut. And the other side tapped in response twice. My friend done the same thing. Tap, tap, tip, tap, tap. Other side, tap, tap. We laughed, assuming our other mates were doing that. Went downstairs once done and went outside to find our friends. They weren't there. They came out from inside a few minutes later. I said, "Nice one on the window tapping. Who climbed up there?" "Climbed up where?" I went outside and pointed to the window, assuming to see a large ledge to support someone. Nope, no ledge. And no way someone could have remotely climbed up there. No open windows nearby, and our friends were downstairs and nowhere near that. Cold chills, and both me and my mate knew that something was tapping on the window. At least it was friendly. Not a ghost hunter, but a believer. We had a friendly ghost in the house I grew up in. My dad had this stereo system for years before moving to this house, and it always worked fine. But depending on the song, my dad would remember what genres I don't. The ghost would either completely turn off the stereo, or he would crank the volume up as loud as he could, and someone would come running into the living room, yelling at him to knock it off while they turned it back down. My dad eventually got rid of the stereo. Our favorite thing would go missing a lot. Like my brother's favorite shirt went missing when he was like 12, and it was some shirt from his first concert, so he always remembered it. It turned up at the top of his shirt drawer the day before he moved out for college. Obviously not the right size anymore, so my mom wouldn't have folded it and put it there on accident. She had no idea it had been found. This sort of thing happened a lot, and me and my two siblings used to play pranks on each other, and it seemed like whoever the prankster was at the time, they had something disappear next, but it would always turn back up eventually. Also, every time it was going to storm, the living room door would slam shut really hard. The living room used to be the door to outside, the patio, but it got built around and turned into a living room. and the windows were replaced and stuff because my dad thought it was like a draft. Nothing ever made it stop. If it was going to thunder and pour, our living room door would slam shut like 10 minutes before it started. The guy who built the house was like ex-military and a survivalist. He died in that house a year before we bought it. The realtor told us if we weren't digging, we might find some cool stuff hidden on the property, but my dad never did. I've had multiple paranormal experiences throughout my life, which isn't uncommon for members of my family. My mom's side of the family is like a magnet for weird shit, which I apparently inherited. Because of this, I was interested in the paranormal from a very early age, and by the time I was in my early 20s, I was running a small amateur paranormal investigation group in my town. We investigated a couple homes and businesses, and though we had some interesting results, there really wasn't anything mind-blowing. Now, at that point in my life, despite everything I'd experienced, I'd never actually seen a full-body apparition, but that changed one night. There was a local cemetery that had a decent amount of activity for some reason, and we used it as a place to test new gear and see how potential new members to the group would react to potential phenomena. The interesting thing about this cemetery was that we would get pretty consistent temperature fluctuations, EMF readings, some EVPs, etc. But anytime we pulled a camera out, everything just sort of stopped. It was frustrating, but it was what it was. Anyway, we were out at this cemetery one night, just asking questions, checking temps and the like, when it happened. I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye and glanced over to the old 2-track that ran along the back edge of the cemetery, and I saw it. A tall, heavy-set man wearing a white shirt and blue overalls, emitting a bluish light as he walked along the 2-track. Unfortunately, I didn't see a face or head because of a low-hanging pine branch, but I saw enough. Now, I had experienced things, as I said, and seen things that were incredible, and I had always just assumed that if I saw a full-body apparition, it would be this amazing, exciting thing. But I was not prepared for how my body actually reacted. I felt my legs lose all their strength and almost fell over. My stomach twisted, and I thought I was going to be sick. I bent over, dizzy, my mind and body completely thrown for a loop. I can't describe the feeling accurately, but when you see something that shouldn't exist and it's right there, there's no way to ever be prepared for it. The human mind is never ready to experience something like that. I saw that same apparition one more time in that cemetery, doing the same thing, walking along the back 2-track, but it's been years since I've seen it now. I will absolutely never forget it though. I'm not a ghost hunter or professional, but I've had a few paranormal experiences. The first was when I was a kid, maybe 5 or 6 years old. I was laying in bed after just waking up. A glowing figure with blue pants and a red shirt walked in through my bedroom window and out the closed door. I froze in absolute panic for a minute and then rushed to open the door it went through. There was nothing there. I told my mom, my friends, and no one believed me. I knew it was real. In my 20s, I worked in a coffee shop in Chinatown in my city, which is known for being a city with a lot of ghost stories. Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. Weird things would happen in this shop that were unexplainable. Dishes would frequently fly off the shelf on their own. There would be places in the shop that had a very strong smell of old perfume, and when you would go to show someone, it would vanish. The radio would get stuck on stations and not be able to be turned off unless you unplugged it. I remember one day, I put it on the 80s station. The girl I was working with told me to change it. I couldn't turn it off, the volume up or down, couldn't change the station. I said, sorry, not sure what I can do. I'm off at 12 p.m., so I'll unplug it if it isn't working by then. At exactly 12 p.m., the radio, by itself, went through a bunch of different channels very fast and then turned itself off. I had customers frequently tell me they felt the shop was haunted or that they think they saw a ghost. It would always be in the same location, walking through a brick pillar wall in the middle of the shop. One day, I did see the ghost myself. I was very hungover, working on a quiet Sunday morning with my coworker. I remember I was reading a fictional book on time travel, and it was blowing my mind. I knew the shop was haunted because I could feel the energy, and with all of the strange things going on, I had the feeling the ghost wanted to show itself to me but I always resisted it for being too afraid. My coworker and I decided to sit down in the shop and have a coffee together since there was no customers. We were sitting and chatting when I saw a glowing white figure of a man walk slowly through that same brick wall. I was absolutely terrified. When my coworker turned around to see what I was in a panic about, it was gone. I questioned myself over and over about it, but it was definitely real. I was in a very weird mental state for a week after the incident because it shook my whole reality. A bunch of us got together and decided to tell the owner of the shop that we thought it was haunted. We told her about the ghost always being seen walking through the same wall. We realized that there was an old newspaper article from the 1800s that was framed and hung as a picture on the wall. When we asked her about it, she said it was found plastered to the wall almost at the ceiling at the time of renovating the shop. The article was about a murder that was never solved. A bunch of my coworkers went to the archives to find out more information, but we never did find anything further out. The shop was very creepy, with a basement trapdoor that has been carpeted over, which was believed to be connected to underground tunnels in the city. A shop across the street was renovated, and they found bloody clothes and a gun built into the wall. There are a lot of different stories in Chinatown. Based on my experiences, ghosts are real, but you have to be in the right mindset to be able to have an experience with one. Also, do not play with Ouija boards. I've had more than enough freaky encounters with those as well. I really believe they are contacting evil, and you do not want to bring that in your life. When I tried to get rid of my Ouija board, it kept reappearing in different places, until I finally cut it up in a bunch of little pieces. Serious. Those who didn't believe in ghosts or the paranormal, what experience did you have that changed your view? A buddy that got separated from the rest of his patrol in a swamp. It was a training mission, but still not a great situation at night. After wandering around for a while and becoming thoroughly lost, he ran into 3 dudes in the darkness. Thinking they were part of one of our sister units that were also out that night, he asked where our platoon was. They pointed him our way, and he wandered up less than 5 minutes later. I asked where he'd been, and he told me the story. Only thing was, and I confirmed this with the patrol leader, we were the last element in the movement, and no one should have been where the 3 men were. Found out later that 3 soldiers died in those swamps in the 90s on a similar mission, and ever since then, multiple soldiers lost and alone in those swamps have encountered 3 soldiers who've guided them back to their comrades. This didn't happen to me, but to my great-grandma. She says she never believed in ghosts or gave them much thought until this experience, and she swears by it. This happened in the 1950s. Great-grandma and great-grandpa had a nice little house together and their first little baby. Baby slept in a crib in the adjacent room. One night, great-grandma wakes up and sees her dead mother standing at the foot of the bed. Dead mother says, "Sonia, the baby," and disappears. Grandma said it happened so fast, she second-guessed whether it had actually happened, but she decided to check on the baby anyway. Baby is purple, with a blanket twisted around his neck. She removed the blanket and baby was okay. She said that was the first and last time that she'd seen a ghost, but it completely changed her view of the world. My mother passed away when I was 16. She had been sick in the hospital, but I never knew that it was that bad. My parents were always telling my older sister and me that it was just a virus and it was passing. I finished working at my first fast food job after school and went home to change before visiting my mother at the hospital. My sister was on her way home to do the same. I heard the side door open, expecting my sister, and heard my mom say, "Finally home." I was getting changed, so I couldn't just run out of my room, but I was super happy. But when I came out, no one was home. Then, my sister drove up the driveway and I went outside. We drove straight to the hospital. This was just before cell phones were popular, so we didn't have anyone contact us. When we got to the hospital, we went to the room. My dad was waiting for us. We knew it was bad news, as my mom wasn't in bed. He was crying. His words, "She's home." He meant she was in heaven. I had an experience that could just have been a weird between dream state, but it was incredibly bizarre. I was living at my grandmother's house for a while, which is built in the same spot as what used to be the old county poor farm. This is a place in olden times where if you were homeless or needy, you could go work on the farm and have a place to stay and eat in this small town in the Pacific Northwest. Not sure if this is relevant, but needless to say, the place had had many people living there in the past. Anyway, it was a hot summer night. I slept naked because it was so hot. I wake up in the middle of the night, to go to the bathroom, and as I'm about to get up, I see what looks to be a human figure standing in the corner near the closet, looking in my direction. It's dark, so I'm still not sure it's not the clothes in my closet making it look that way, but I'm still already freaked out. At the time, I thought that someone had broken into the house and was there to try to rape and or kill me, and had been there waiting while I slept naked, while I was totally vulnerable. I'm actually grateful in a way because I had a fight or flight moment and I chose to fight. I get up, start yelling, "What are you doing here?" and run for the light switch. I turned the light switch and saw a fully formed man with a graying beard and blue eyes, wearing traditional lumberjack type clothing, who then started dissolving, just like they would show in a movie about ghosts or whatever, until he was completely transparent. My heart was beating 1,000,000 miles a second, and I was in a state of high adrenaline after that, but on some level, I was glad that it wasn't a real person trying to kill me, and just a ghost or a strange hallucination. I'd always liked ghost stories, but never really thought they were necessarily real, but man, just the fact that I turned on the light, maybe thinking it was a shadow, and seeing a fully formed human that I could recognize details about was really freaky. I drew a picture of him that day after. If people care to see, then maybe I can find it next time I visit my parents. Let me start off by saying I consider myself a rational person and a skeptic. I don't believe in ghosts, demons, etc. That being said, I don't know how to explain what I witnessed about 10 years ago. I was on a train heading upstate, sitting by the window listening to music. Suddenly, the doors that separate the train cars slide open, and in steps maybe the strangest looking man I've ever seen. I can't really describe it well. His face was just very angular and strange, like a real-life caricature. He also looked homeless and had an unbearable stench that filled the entire train car. He wore dirty but bright, colorful clothes and what looked like a tutu skirt thing. The whole thing was just strange, but I didn't pay much attention because I've seen much stranger. So, he's working his way down the aisle and I'm holding my breath until he reaches the other end of the car and proceeds to the next one. Here's the part that still messes with me to this day. It happened again. I don't mean he went back from the other direction. I mean this guy came back into our train car from the way he originally came in. This is a single-decker train with one aisle, and there was no way I wouldn't have noticed him coming past me again, just no way. My mind is racing and I'm kind of freaking out. Did this guy somehow climb on top of the train Mission Impossible style and come back in? No, that's crazy, I thought. But I had no explanation. I was mystified. It was pure deja vu, except it happened right before my eyes. The interesting thing is, almost everyone else in that train car seemed to acknowledge something astonishing and strange had just taken place. I don't know why I didn't yell, "Did you guys just see that, or am I crazy?" No one said anything, but we all sort of looked at each other, wearing those puzzled looks on our faces. I still think about what happened all the time, and I've never been able to rationally explain it. I was 15 at the time at my local Walgreens buying an iced tea with my friend around 10 p.m. Everything went as it had every other time we'd stop by for some snacks. We grabbed our drinks and turned the corner to check out when a small man, I'm talking 5'2" max, walks by wearing a traditional ancient South American poncho and long gray braided hair. His face was wrinkled and his eyes looked unnaturally aged. As he walked by us, we made eye contact and in a hissing whisper, he said, "What a hupasa," directly at me. I was a little shaken by it and assured with my friend that it had actually happened. Weird shit happens sometimes, so we just figured he was some senile old man, bought our drinks and quickly left for home. This led me to look up the phrase in many different spellings, trying to find a translation to no avail. I told my other friends the next day, and they agreed that although it was strange, it was probably nothing to overthink. Fast forward a few months to human geography class. We were watching a historical documentary about ancient tribes in South America. One of the leaders was in an argument with another tribal leader when he spoke those same words, "Watahu pasa." I instantly looked to see the translation on the subtitles and was met with terror. "You will pay with your life." One of my other friends that I had told about the incident at Walgreens was sitting in front of me and turned slowly with his mouth agape. I've never seen this man again in my small town and have absolutely no idea why he would say this to me. I'm still on the fence about my feelings of ghosts. I've posted this story more than once, so I'll keep it as short as possible. Grandpa died. I was about 7. Went to funeral in Florida. In middle of the night, I see Grandpa poke his head out from his bedroom like he's checking on me. Classic ghost. glowing, white, ethereal. I keep this info to myself for 20 plus years, thinking it was overactive kid imagination. One day, I casually mentioned it to my sister, 2 years older. She was in a different part of the house. She saw the exact same thing and never brought it up for the same reason. So, I still don't believe in ghosts, but I do believe in some sci-fi-esque multiverse stuff that kinda makes my experience work out. I grew up in a house that definitely had one or more entities or things in it. My mom grew up in the house and mentioned several times she'd wake up at night to see an old man standing at the end of her or her brother's bed, watching over them. My dad never believed her until they'd been married, and he experienced the same thing, waking up to the old man standing at the end of the bed watching. There's tons of other stuff, like footsteps coming from parts of the house that had no one in them, weird noises, horribly creepy feelings of being watched, stuff being messed with, and noises of stuff being moved around when there was no way stuff could be moved. I still don't like the dark because of the house. Weird thing is, when my dad passed away 7 years ago, it all stopped. My mom brought it up in conversation a while ago, that everything seemed to stop when he passed away, and the house became peaceful. I'm an atheist, and have trouble getting my head around what I grew up with and what has happened since, but I'd like to think that Dad told him to fuck off and stop bothering us. Not really related to paranormal events, but after reading a bunch of stories about dreams, I want to know if anyone else has the same thing I experience. Whenever I dream, I get glimpses, like short 2 to 3 second scenes, brief enough for me to see my surroundings. And then, from a few weeks to months later, these scenes occur in real life, like glimpses into the future basically. I'm not sure if this is all in my mind, but these have occurred so radically, but consistently, to the point where I don't think my dream scenes are a coincidence. I was in my new house. It was a 2-bed flat, but one bedroom was upstairs with the living room and the other was downstairs. So I was using the living room as a big bedroom, so both my room and kids' room were on one level. I was sleeping and I heard someone breathing. I wasn't scared because I thought it was my son. He was 4, my daughter a newborn. I turned over and out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone behind the curtain. Normally I'd be hysterical, but for some reason I felt really calm, like way chilled out. I sat up in bed and asked who they were. He was only about 15. He was wearing a school uniform. He said his name was Tom and he died in a fire. I said, okay, but why are you here? He said he just was. The next time I remember is waking up in the morning to my daughter crying to be fed. I assumed I'd dreamt it, until I mentioned it to my mother, and she said a boy named Tom had died in the garage under the flat a few years back. He would have been the same age as me. Funnily enough, I actually became friendly with his sister when our eldest started school together. I obviously never mentioned my dream because I wasn't sure what it was, but I do believe 100% in ghosts and the like. A few days after my sister's dad passed away and my mom was going through a huge rough phase from it, I decided to help clean the house. As I was doing the dishes, I saw out of the corner of my eye the shoes that he had always wore and a half a leg walking out the front door. I wasn't scared or anything, just felt shocked and saddened afterward. My mom actually saw him too, like 2 days after I did. She walked in their bedroom and saw his hand on the chair that he always sat on when playing video games. Keep in mind, he was only in his late 20s when he passed. After he was cremated, we didn't see any signs of him again. At our house growing up, we had those intercom systems. There's one in every room, so you could talk to people throughout the house. The only thing is they were old and rarely worked. They could play the radio, which was cool, but we couldn't use them to talk to each other. My mom told me she remembers being in the basement with my sister and I and hearing the intercom turn on and could hear a little static and then a very deep voice laughing. There was no one else at home at the time. It wasn't the creepiest thing she had experienced there, but still it freaked her out, but she just played it cool and stayed with us downstairs until my dad got home. Another time, my parents heard a wailing coming from the downstairs of the same house. The way it was set up was their bedroom was on the top floor, and my sister and I were on the bottom floor by the basement, living room, etc. They could hear this wailing coming from directly below their room, so right next to my sister's room, and also mine. She said the wailing just sounded so mournful. It was really disturbing. So my dad went downstairs to check on us girls, and she remembers that as she could hear my dad moving through the house, the closer he got to where the source of the noise was, the quieter it got. By the time he reached our rooms, it was gone. Both my sister and I were fast asleep in our beds. Growing up there and being freaked out by the downstairs all the time, and then hearing these stories really makes me believe in something else. That house has a weird energy. Since moving into this house in 2009, everyone in my family has experienced something and believes this place is haunted, except I think my dad, who is still maybe skeptical. He's been home alone before and heard someone walking around upstairs. My grandmother's music box, this is the thing that happens the most, has started to play, and he says it's because you all walk too hard around it. But we could literally all be in another room, and you will hear the tiny piano start playing that old-timey piano song. I forgot what it's called. Anyway, usually the music box will play when something happens in our family, good or bad, and we always take it as a sign of my grandmother watching over us. But there is also a different sort of thing we think is in the house that isn't my grandmother. The first thing that I always seem to forget happened a few years after moving in. My boyfriend at the time was staying over, and we weren't allowed to share beds, so he was sleeping in the guest room. The next day, he brings up last night. What were you doing? I'm honestly confused, as I hadn't left my room all night and slept really good. He says I woke up and the door was open. You walked in and stood by the bed. I kept asking you what you're doing and you wouldn't answer me, you just stared. So I just went back to sleep. I wasn't even really creeped out by this because I knew that I hadn't got up. So I said maybe it was my mom doing a load of laundry and she peeped in to see if you needed anything. We asked her and she said she hadn't been in the basement since the day before, daytime. So my dad is out west visiting my brothers for a month. This was 5 years ago. And during this time, I was living in Quebec, a few provinces away. So only my sister and mom were at the house. It's late at night, and my sister is packing in the other room for a camp retreat she's going to. My mom is in bed alone, sleeping. Mom wakes up and sees what she thinks is my sister standing beside her bed, illuminated by the moon. Kinda, but really is just black outline of my sister. She keeps asking her what she's doing, but it won't answer. So finally, Mom just yells out her name, and a few seconds later, my sister runs in the room, thinking my mom needs help or something. The thing besides the bed is gone. A few nights later, my sister is sleeping in her room and wakes up in the middle of the night and sees the same thing staring at the foot of the bed. She calls out for my mom, who runs in and tells it to leave, and they both sleep together. After my sister left for her camp, my mom was too afraid to stay at the house alone, so she slept on the couch at my aunt's cottage. During this whole thing, my mom is sending me texts, telling me about it, and eventually says she has a family friend to try to bless the house. I can't remember how that worked out, but I don't think the lady ended up coming in the house. 3 years later, I'm back at home and in my room sleeping. My room is in the basement, and I'm the only one who sleeps down there. I woke up around 3 a.m. facing the wall side of my bed and lay awake for a few minutes, just thinking about shit, not really tired. After a bit, I roll over to switch to the cool side of the pillow, and that fucking thing is standing beside the bed, staring down at me. It was black, had hair and the shape of a woman, but I couldn't make out anything distinct. My body turned hot and felt like I was being stabbed with 100 pins and needles. I rolled back to the other way, pulled up the covers, and called my house phone, crying to my mom that the thing was in my room. She came in and yelled at it to leave, and we slept together on the couches outside my room. Ever since then, I don't sleep with the lights off unless I have my boyfriend with me, then I feel safe. I don't think this is classified as sleep paralysis, because we've all been woken up to it and stayed awake having conversations with other family members about what we've seen. It's been a while since anyone has seen it, but you still get a weird feeling once in a while. A few things about the house. The man who, literally, as I typed that part of my oil diffuser, just abruptly shut off across the room. The man who built the house, his wife passed in it. There's a hidden safe in my closet we've never been able to get open, even though he gave us the combination. My mom and I both get night terrors. Hers are worse than mine, where she needs to be shaken awake from them. When my family lived in Royce City, the neighbors we were close with had a daughter who claimed someone broke into her room, raped her, and left through the window. We were no older than 13 at the time, so about the 4th or 5th time she said it, her dad, who was the local sheriff, set up a load of cameras all over the house and inside her room. I remembered nothing happened for like a week after that, so during that time I slept over, she'd say over and over she felt this huge hand press down her face and held her down while being assaulted. The way she detailed it had that scary ghost story vibe, mainly because she couldn't explain how she didn't see anyone enter or leave the room. Plus, we were kids, so we believed everything we told each other. Come to find, the camera in her room ended up showing her blanket being yanked almost off the bed, and her legs chucked open and lifted about an inch into the air. You see her eyes open. It looked like the moment she wanted to scream, her face was pushed upward, chin facing the ceiling, almost to the wall behind her head, whilst trying to cover her lower parts with her hands. There wasn't audio, but you could see when she screamed, everything just stopped, and her parents rushed in moments after, with her dad holding up his gun. I can't explain it, but it was almost like you could see the energy just leave the room. They took her to see a priest the next few days, and last I heard, they moved a few years after that. I still don't believe in ghosts in a traditional sense, but that's a whole other story. I had an experience a few years back that gives me goosebumps whenever I retell it. I lived in Australia for a few years, and a while back, not long after I'd moved there, a couple of my ex-girlfriend's friends invited me to one of their friends' barbecues. With the house being fairly outside the city and me living in the city center, the host offered to put me up for the night, and I accepted since I had no idea where I actually was location-wise. The bed they had set up for me was like a floor bed situated in the kitchen, diner, conservatory area. It was a decent-sized house. So I'm lying in this bed asleep, and I get woken by this noise. I can only describe it as sounding like a stone or pebble bouncing several times, like a tat-tat-tat noise. Something being thrown and skipping along the floor. I woke up slightly disoriented and confused, waking in a strange environment, and I hear this noise again and realize that facing the bottom of my bed is an open door. My goosebumps have just kicked in while I type. That door leads immediately to another door, facing to the left that's ajar, and I think leads to a room or closet. I wasn't brave enough to properly look. I hear the noise again and realize it's coming from in that room or closet. The noise was repetitive but different each time. Anyway, I suddenly start to become really scared, genuine fear. I lie there for what seems like an age, listening to this tat-tat-tat, tat-tat-tat-tat every minute or so. I eventually build up the courage to jump up, and I run to the ajar door, shut it, and pull the bolt across it, then shut the open door and dive back into bed. I'm laying there, adrenaline going, and I'm starting to calm down a bit, and out of nowhere, I hear this noise. My goosebumps just went wild. The bolt on the inner door just snapped open, and I hear the door creak as it opens ajar again. A few seconds of silence and tat-tat-tat. Probably the closest I've ever been to a heart attack. I didn't sleep at all for the rest of the night, and I politely refused to hang around the next day. What is your personal encounter with the paranormal, ghosts, aliens, sleep paralysis, glitch in the matrix, etc.? We joke about the girl who lives in our house. My wife insists that she was a victim of a fire in a schoolhouse in the 1870s that was on our property before the house was built. We've never seen her, but there's the occasional door locked or unlocked, or the errant attic light on, and so forth. Not a presence that is very strong or overbearing. There was one time, though, when my wife was in the kitchen and I was coming down the stairs, and we both heard, "You're a good girl, Dottie," coming from the living room. Dottie is our dog. Trouble, but a good girl to be sure. Apparently, there is one more person besides my wife and I in the house who agrees. I don't believe in ghosts or paranormal connections and shit, but this one really baffles me to this day. Happened a couple of years back, and I still can't forget it. Warning, story is kind of a downer. Also, sorry that it's long, but this is about as condensed as I could get it. Most of my friends have had trouble with substance abuse throughout their lives. Just the crowd I hung around with, I guess. Around this time, one of my closest friends was clean off H for the longest they had ever been, a couple of months, but still fantastic progress for him, and things were looking good. We were hanging out one day, and he gave me some great news. Since middle school, he and his mom had been fighting for a medical malpractice lawsuit that happened to him when he was younger, and they won. He got something like 10 to 15K out of the deal. So most of what we talked about that day was just how he was going to buy his mom something nice, and how he was going to use that money to finally go to college. I honestly hadn't seen him that happy in years, and it was great. A day or two later, I was sleeping like normal, when all of a sudden, I woke up at around 1 a.m. I felt great. In fact, I felt absolutely euphoric. I felt like I was laying in the sun on the most beautiful summer's day in a puddle of 1,000 puppies. And that was just the first second. The next second was that times 1,000. And the next second, that times 1,000 as well. Within moments, however, I went from "this is pretty nice" to "oh shit, something is seriously wrong," before blacking out. All of a sudden, I was walking down the stairs to my friend's basement. It was absolutely destroyed, with shit thrown everywhere, and empty bottles and syringes laying around. He was sitting there, waiting for me on the couch with tears in his eyes. He just kept repeating that he was sorry, and that he didn't want to hurt anyone. He said the money didn't last him long, and he's back to being his broke-ass self, that he was sorry for bringing me there, and that he just needed to say goodbye to someone, before finally saying goodbye to me, and everything fading out in a wave of euphoria. Me being logical to a fault and pretty straightforward, I woke up the next morning thinking, damn, what a weird dream. But not much else of it. Wrote it down in a dream journal I was doing at the time, and completely forgot about it. Ended up going to work and class like normal. Then a couple hours later, my friend's mom called. She called me to break the news that my friend had passed away that night, overdose. It wasn't until a couple of months later when another friend of mine, also ex-addict, was trying to console me by telling me how he went out with no pain, and how it was probably the best way to go when things started to get really weird. He started to explain to me what an overdose actually feels like, the overwhelming euphoria, and how it's impossible to explain to someone who's never experienced it before, i.e. me. It was then that what he was describing started to sound really familiar, and I went to my phone, opened my dream journal, and started reading the entry from a couple of months back to him out loud. He pretty much said, yeah, exactly that, where you get that story from, and told him the whole thing. Both of us were at a loss for words, and I still am. As I said, I don't believe in this stuff, and if someone told me this story, I would say they were high as fuck. But it's a memory that I will never forget. My mom's experience with what she thinks was a ghost. She went outside around 10 p.m. for a cigarette years ago and saw a very elderly woman walking up our neighbor's back stairs to their veranda. Mom said she wanted to ask if she was all right. It was very rare for our neighbors to have visitors that late. They were also elderly. But Mom said she completely lost her voice and felt stunned, though she couldn't look away. She ended up getting out a hello, and the woman just disappeared. The next morning, Mom made a joke to our neighbors, asking why she wasn't invited over for their nightcap with their visitor, and they very casually replied, "Oh, so now you've seen our ghost too." They were excited over it, and not at all scared. Barry, neighbor, says an elderly lady follows Elwyn, his wife, everywhere, and they feel pure comfort around her. But their own children and grandchildren are frightened by the lady on the stairs when they stay. Mine isn't scary in the slightest, but I like to think of it as a weird glitch in the Matrix. One summer afternoon, when I was younger, my family heard the music of an ice cream truck coming down our road. Ice cream trucks never come down our road. We ran outside and placed our orders, and expressed our astonishment to the woman inside. "Really?" she said. "I come down this road every week." "Ah, sure you do," we all responded. She drove off, and we never saw her again. I'm sure it was just a mistake on her part, but I'd like to think there's an alternate reality where we get ice cream trucks down our street every week. When I was little, maybe 5, I would walk into my parents' bedroom to crawl into bed with them. Many times, when walking into their room, I would see a young girl in a white dress standing at the foot of their bed. I would be paralyzed with fear, but being young, I don't think I understood what I was seeing. I would take agonizing steps forward until I could crawl into bed, and then cover myself completely in their blankets. She never moved, spoke, or acknowledged my presence. She was just there. In my hometown in northern Florida, we would sometimes get a thick fog that was terrible to navigate. I was always told by my grandparents that if I ever saw Confederate soldiers walking in that fog, keep my head down and move along even if they talked to me. Rare advice for the South. As for Yankee soldiers, I was to nod and point them in a direction if they said they were lost. And if I ever ran into a woman in a white dress named Caroline, don't tell her your name and excuse yourself before she touches you. I pissed off a ghost at my old job. Short version. Was told the carousel was haunted and didn't believe them. One night, the maintenance door was open after I emptied the ride of guests, and my second insisted they hadn't opened it. Closed it, loaded guests, and it was open again. It was a turn latch that you put a padlock on, so it could only be opened intentionally. I went inside, the center of the carousel. mostly just the breaker and all the mechanical parts in there, and switched on the light to check for a maintenance guy that hadn't talked to me. Empty. I'm a little spooked, so I say loudly, "I'm not dealing with this shit tonight. We got 1 hour left, so get your act together," in my mom voice. Do safety checks, start the ride. Phone rings, and when I answer, there's no one on the other end. A few minutes later, it happens again. After I hang up, I call base to tell them something's wrong with the phone. Supervisor calls back, says sometimes the phone rings randomly, don't worry about it. I recant the tale to a coworker, and she looks at me funny. "Did you turn the lights off before the music?" "No, I need the lights to get to the switch." "Oh, well, make sure you never do. And if the phone rings after that, don't answer, just leave. I figure it's some kind of electrical short that causes it, and go home." In the following days, I keep thinking I see it move out of the corner of my eye, or hear it running after I've closed for the night, but shake it off as I was working 15-hour days continuously. The next time I opened the carousel, we took turns. I go to take a potty break, and I come back to the security guard standing next to my ride. "I saw him while you were gone. Just be careful," he says to me. "What are you talking about?" "The ride up. The one that tries to grab operators." I try to think which of my coworkers is that rude. He then goes on to explain that one of the 3 park ghosts is attached to the carousel, and he's the only mean one. He tries to grab operators and causes bad luck and ride malfunctions. Apparently, I made him mad by yelling at him, and he decided to haunt the F out of me. I grew up with a strange mom. We don't really talk anymore. She was a paranormal investigator when I was growing up. There were loads of stories there. When I was about 3, there is video footage of me coming downstairs as angry as could be. Not temper tantrum angry, pissed. In the video, I keep yelling at my mom that they won't let me play with my toys. She tried to ask me who. I just kept angrily telling her that they wouldn't let me play with my toys. We didn't get a cat until I was 4, but before that, there was some kind of cat creature in the house. I had seen it in my mother's closet once. Another time, I remember being woken in the middle of the night, but a cat yowling in my playroom, the next room over. I could see a shadow under the door before I opened it and heard a hiss. Upon opening the door, there was nothing there. As I got older, things got stranger. After my mother got back from the catfish plantation, strange things started happening. We could hear someone running up and down the stairs at night. Shoes would be thrown down the stairs. My most vivid memory of this time was me sitting on my mom's bed. We had no pets at the time, and it was just me and her. Her bathroom was attached to their bedroom. She was the kind of woman that had 20 almost empty bottles on the side of the tub. While watching Barney one day, it sounded as if someone had stuck their arm out and just swiped all the bottles into the tub at once. My mother came around the corner yelling, "Jeremy!" Turned out, Jeremy was the name of a young man who was a slave at the plantation she had visited. He had fallen off the back of a hay wagon and died. After that day, she got back in her car and drove back to the plantation, and all the strange happenings stopped. Also, now she believes she's an alien, so that's a whole other story, LOL. Before my grandpa passed away, he always had been telling us how after he had died, he would appear to us in his white clothes and watch over us. He passed away from cancer when I was 8. The years passed, and I was a very unhappy kid, undiagnosed autism, sexual assault victim, so at age 14 I tried to hang myself. It failed, thank God. As I was drifting away, my grandpa's image appeared to me and told me this wasn't my time to go yet, and begged me to wake up. I did wake, lying on my bedroom floor, and I ran downstairs to my mom crying, telling her what I had done. She went upstairs shortly after to clean up the ropes and told me much later that it looked as if they had been cut clean with a knife. After that traumatic event, I began seeing things, puffs of mist, outside in front of my bedroom window. When I was 16, was the first time I actually did see that it was my grandpa, just floating in front of my window. I tried to talk to him a few times. I asked him why he couldn't come inside. He responded that he couldn't, because my mom had asked him not to. We spoke about a few things on occasion when he mentioned the day where I tried to take my own life. He told me he tried to save me by cutting the rope, and then went to check on me a few times. One time, my younger brother apparently saw him slip into my bedroom and got scared, after which my mother apparently went upstairs, asked my grandpa that if he was there to please not come in anymore, as he was scaring her son. I decided to tell my mom about all this and took her out for dinner, told her everything. She was shocked and amazed and confirmed that she did tell her father to not come inside, and that was why he stayed outside. I'm just glad she believed me. I have since had more traumatic experiences with the paranormal and have shut myself off to their influences, but I still remember the events with my grandpa vividly. Many years ago, I was about to walk out of my locker room with my books, and for some unknown reason I stopped. The second I thought, WTF am I doing, and went to take a step outside, a window pane fell from 4 stories above me and shattered 2 meters in front of me. I was so shocked and thought that would have made an absolute mess of my head if I hadn't stopped. Still don't know why I stopped to this day. Weird. My parents' house has a ghost. When my sister, 42, was about 5, she started talking about the Green Lady. Of course, us older 3 sisters made fun of her a lot. She continued for several years talking about the Green Lady. Then one day when I, 48, was in middle school, I went upstairs and heard a swooshing sound. I turned to see what it was. There was a lady with a long green dress, like from the 1800s, and dark hair tied up really pretty. Then, just like that, she was gone. I never saw her again, but my mom took in a little boy for a while for a family that needed us when I was in high school, and he always talked to a lady upstairs when he was alone. He was only 3 when he stayed with us. Also, lots of weird things happened in my parents' house. Cupboards would open and shut on their own, and the water faucets would turn on by themselves. I don't know the history before a house was built, but it would have been newly claimed land in the early 1800s. We rented a large house. Each evening, my wife would take our daughter upstairs for a bath and put her to bed. I stayed downstairs, spending a couple of hours on my laptop before going upstairs myself. For 3 years, nothing unusual happened. Then, one November evening, when my wife and daughter had retired upstairs and I was on the laptop, the room went icy cold and I started shivering. I had a sensation that someone was standing right behind me, staring straight at the back of my head. For several minutes, I struggled to turn and look behind me, but I was paralyzed. It remained like this for a few minutes, and then the temperature suddenly returned to normal and I could move. There was nothing behind me. I didn't mention anything to my wife about my experience. The same events then occurred for the next 3 evenings. Still, I said nothing. On the 4th evening, after my wife had gone upstairs, instead of opening up my laptop, I sat on the sofa watching TV, and from this position, I could view the entire living room. After a few moments, I became aware that there was this translucent figure of a young girl, aged around 6 to 7 years old, with long blonde hair and dressed in night clothes. At first, I thought it was my daughter, but she has dark brown hair. The figure stood looking into the room for several minutes, then turned, walked down the hallway, and disappeared into the kitchen. The atmosphere was one of calm. I got up and followed her into the kitchen, but she had gone. I decided to go to bed, and still did not say anything to my wife for fear of upsetting her. The next evening I was on the sofa, and once again the little girl appeared, and stood silently, just looking into the room, and once again she turned, walked down the hall, and disappeared. When I woke up the next morning, I decided to tell my wife. I began by saying that there was something I need to talk to her about. Without any further prompting, she said to me, "Was it about the little girl? Had she seen her too?" "Yes, often." I told her she could stay as long as she didn't cause a nuisance. I said that I thought her appearance were going to increase for some reason. My wife, who is quite religious, said she would say some prayers and tell the little girl it would be okay for her to leave us. After this, we never saw the little girl again. There is a strange ending to the story, however. About 6 months later, my work contract finished and we had to move away from the house. I called the landlord and he came over as we were leaving to settle up the paperwork and so on. During our conversations with the landlord, he mentioned that we were his longest renters and most people left usually after a few months. I joked that it might be because the house was haunted and related our story to him. The landlord then told us he had originally designed and built this house for his young family, but when their youngest daughter was 6 years old, she had woken up one night and climbed over the upstairs railing and fell to her death onto the stone floor below. The family were so distraught, they moved out and rented their home rather than selling it. The landlord said his wife had not set foot inside the house for the next 15 years, right up until his wife's death the previous November. I reminded my wife that it was in November when we first began to see the little girl, and we now believe she had come in search of her mother. We felt that after saying prayers, we helped them to meet up and pass over together to the other side. Dad was out with his girlfriend about 2 hours away from home, and I had the house to myself. I was showering, and about 4 to 7 hours before I expected them to return, and I heard our garage door open. It had a very distinctive sound due to the way it echoed through the kitchen and across the open plan tiled house. Immediately, heard the clicking of his girlfriend's boots and knew it was her from how short she was compared to the rest of the family. She walked like she had to prove something to make up for her height. She was definitely saying something to my dad too as she entered, and I could hear him say something back. Since it was so early for them to be home, I had a feeling something was off. I was already basically done with my shower, so I hopped out and threw on a towel, opening the door and looking down the hall and across the house for them. I absolutely pulled the horror movie rookie move of investigating in a towel, walked the length of the house, saw the gate outside was still closed, opened the door to the garage and saw it empty, and even did an extra loop to rule out me missing something. I was 100% home alone still. This wasn't the first time I'd heard something home alone, it was just the most distinct. My whole family has heard the slider doors open. When I went car shopping with my dad, my sister heard the garage door and the door into the house from the garage open. No one came home then either. My dad has seen people on the property at 3 a.m., but they're gone without a trace and too fast for a real criminal to be snooping. The house just makes noises that imitate us and aspects of the home. The walls don't bleed though, so we still live there. I have several, but the first I remember is when I was 4 to 5 and lived in a house 3 houses up from a graveyard. I was asleep and woke up to a noise and saw a cat walk through my dresser. We didn't have any pets. Years later, my grandmother told me she saw that same cat a few times when she came to visit. Another night, I was sleeping and my arm was hanging off the side of the bed and something was breathing on my fingers. Needless to say, I'm terrified of any body part being out from under the covers when I sleep. My mom told the story of seeing a soldier sitting on our porch when she pulled into the driveway. Scary part was, we were home with my dad at the time and were sleeping. She said when she got out of the car, he was gone, but she knew she had saw him. Watched this movie when I was around 9 or 10. Watched it with my whole family, and as it was happening, I kept saying, wait, I've seen this movie before. My sister said, that's impossible, this movie just came out, yet I was able to recite every scene and exactly what was going to happen. My family was freaked out because they just rented the movie and obviously they didn't go with me to the movie theaters to watch it with me. I don't know why I knew everything that was going to happen in the movie, but I just did. And to this day, I have no explanation as to why I had already seen a movie that I'd never watched before. I still haven't been able to find the name of the movie anywhere, which is another mystery. But it was about this girl who has a hit and run of an older man one night coming home, and she doesn't want anyone to find out, so she hides him in her garage. I remember the end of the movie ending with the guy lighting the garage on fire or something. Does anyone know what movie this is? I've been trying to find it for years.
What is your personal encounter with the paranormal, ghosts, aliens, sleep paralysis, glitch in the matrix, etc.? Not me, but my dad. He grew up in a small village in Greece. One day on his walk home, it was storming quite heavily. He was standing under a tree in an attempt to wait it out. As he's waiting, he's approached by a slow old woman he'd never seen before. She had an umbrella in one hand and a walking stick in the other. She asks him, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm waiting out the storm so I can go home. I don't want to catch a cold." She tells him, "You have a long life ahead of you. I would risk catching a cold if I were you." And with that, she slowly starts to walk down the street and out of sight. My dad waits for a few more minutes and takes her advice. He starts walking home. A few more minutes pass and he hears an explosion. He turns around and sees that the tree he was waiting under was hit by lightning and blew up. Mortified, he runs to his home, hoping to bump into the old woman to thank her, but he never saw her again after that encounter. He's convinced she was a paranormal being since he never caught up to her that night, even though she was so slow. He had never seen her in the village before or after that moment, and no one knew who he was referring to when asking around for her. Just recently, about 2 weeks ago, I was on my way to Home Depot when I arrived at this stoplight. After sitting there about 15 seconds or so, the light turns green. As soon as it did, I felt like I couldn't move at all. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like if something was telling me not to just go. After about a second or two, this red Ford Explorer barrels through the intersection, running the red at what must have been about 50 miles per hour. I don't know how much exactly, but it went ridiculously fast. After the car sped through the intersection, I could move again. I don't know what that something was, but had it not been for that, I would have probably not been able to tell you all this little story. Growing up, my sister and I were good friends with our neighbor Matt, who had a dog, Molly. Molly ran away one day, so the three of us set out into the nature preserve behind our houses to look for her. Matt's brother Chris set out separately. In the preserve is an old dam or mill from the 1700s that is rumored to be haunted. When we got to the mill, we saw Chris and the dog on the other side of the river, maybe 30 yards away. "Matt, I got her. I'm bringing her home," Chris yelled. But something didn't feel right, and the three of us gave each other that look. We headed home knowing Chris would be a bit behind us since he'd have to go a mile or two out of his way to cross the bridge. When we got home, there was Matt's mom and the dog. "She was under the porch the whole time," she said. A little while later, Chris showed up, having never even gone into that part of the woods. My sister had a dream that she was kidnapped and being used as a sex slave in a random basement in an unknown location. Obviously, it freaked her out, but that's not the crazy part. The next day, her ex-boyfriend called her to ask if she was okay, because he had a dream that she got abducted and nobody knew where she was. I don't know if this was some weird coincidence, but when I was 14, I was staying the night at my friend's house and we decided to sleep in the guest room instead of her own bedroom. She kept telling me she thought the room was haunted, and I thought she was just trying to wind me up, but just before she went to sleep, she mentioned it again. At that moment, everything suddenly went really cold, and the radio randomly switched on and started making weird static noises, even though nothing touched it. My friend refused to sleep in there ever again. I think I lived in a haunted dorm room. My roommate and I kind of assumed the previous tenants were joking when they said they summoned a ghost, but it felt like bizarre, unexplainable nonsense was constantly happening in that room. About once a week, we would both wake up from a dead sleep at the same time, usually 3:06 a.m., and both our phones would be glowing or the radio and the TV would turn on simultaneously. One night, we were laying in bed, and everything on top of my roommate's wardrobe fell to the floor. Our toilet water turned red one day and stayed black for like 2 months, then went back to normal. It was never clogged and kept working just fine, it just was really off-putting. When we were showering, the shower curtain would get yanked open. Over spring break, I was one of maybe 12 people staying on campus. I woke up one night to loud snoring coming from my roommate's empty bed. I laid as still as I could for what felt like forever, until it finally grew quieter and quieter. Terrified of what would happen or what I would see if I rolled over. It was constant and always felt creepy and slightly malicious, like the ghost was just fucking with us. One afternoon though, that changed. I'm not a napper, like, at all, but that day I just really needed a nap. I curled up under a blanket at the foot of my bed facing the door. At some point, I very groggily woke up and could tell someone was in the room watching me. I was scared at first, but when I opened my eyes, I saw the vague outline of my grandpa standing in the doorway. It was like a wave of relief. I felt so safe and comforted by his presence. That semester was really, really challenging for me, but it felt like he was checking in to make sure I knew I would be okay. I've never shared that with anyone because I just knew it was him. There wasn't like cool concrete proof or anything, but all the weird shit from our other ghosty friend stopped after that. I posted this a while back, but here's my encounter. Happened when I was in my mid to late teens. It was a Friday evening, maybe about 6 p.m. I was walking my dog through the woods. I was wearing headphones. I used to walk her all the time on this route, so no reason to be afraid. It was very rare to see anyone else walking at this time of day on a Friday, actually, why I had chosen to walk her then. And I'm coming down through this field or valley when all of a sudden I start to feel on edge. The feeling just kept getting worse. So I turned off my iPod and took my headphones out. I was half jogging. By the time I got to the bottom of this field, my dog had taken off way ahead of me at this point. I squeezed through a hole in the fence and onto the dirt path surrounded by trees, took the usual right and kept checking behind me. Well, here's the horrifying part. I keep turning around to check if anyone's behind me, and I see someone, or some shadow-like figure, which is more what this looked like, flick from behind one tree to behind another, bigger oak tree. I think I audibly yelped at this point, but I kept power walking away. I was still fairly close to whoever or whatever this was, and tiny teenage me knew that I was unlikely to be able to outrun this thing. I kept walking a few more paces before turning around again. This goddamn thing is now standing right in the center of the path, further back near the tree. It had its arms straight down, but out from its sides, its hands were fists, and it stood with this wide-legged stance. I say thing because it looked like the shadow of a man. It looked like it had a cloak and a whitish-brimmed hat, but the whole figure was completely opaque. It just looked angry, and it's staring right down the path at me. Needless to say, I sprinted home from there and practically had a panic attack when I made it back. No idea what it was, but I know what I saw. This was in the UK, and urban legend about that wood, and the crossroads area in particular, is that they used to hang people back on that oak tree way back when. Whatever the hell it was, it's not something I'll ever forget. My wife of 22 years died earlier this year. She was every bit the happy homemaker. Every day after I went to work, and she would make our bed like a soldier in basic training. It had to be just perfect, including the massive pile of throw pillows we had to unload every night and stack on a small couch in our room. During the last few months, when she became bedbound, I, of course, had to take over all the cleaning duties, which did not include a daily making of the bed. So the pillows remained stacked on the couch for months without moving. The night she died, I was awoken by the sound of a fan in our room being knocked over. I turned on the light, and the pile of throw pillows, which had not moved in months, fell onto the floor and knocked over the fan that was about 2 feet away from the couch. I piled them back up on the couch and got back into bed. I checked the time to see how long I had been asleep. It was 2:12 in the morning. My wife's birthday is February 12th. One night, I was going to sleep, and all of a sudden I start sweating profusely. I tried to get up and turn on the AC, and I could not move from my bed. I was confused and a bit scared. I tried to shout to my sister in the next room over. I couldn't talk either. At this point is when I saw a dark figure in the corner watching me. It felt like years until the silence broke. It muttered in a distorted voice, "You're not safe." At this point, I could hear my heart pounding like it was in my ear. Next thing I knew, the figure moved across the room and to the foot of my bed. It stared into my soul, and then I could move. I was soaked in sweat, and that night I did not sleep. To this day, I have never had sleep paralysis after that, and I still wonder, am I really safe? My old apartment building, I would always see a cat, kinda skinny black cat. I have a cat, but the cat I was seeing was not mine. I know it wasn't a real cat because it was in my apartment and I hadn't actually seen it, just glimpses of it. Well, one night my actual cat was already on my bed. Well, I felt another cat jump on the bed. My cat frizzed up and started hissing. She hardly hisses at anything. I definitely wasn't dreaming. Edit. My girlfriend and I would both see it, and it would be random at all times of the day. My sister lived in the same building as us for a while. I had never told her about it, thinking I was going crazy. One day my sister and I were out and she told me she kept seeing what she thought was a black cat in her apartment. Sent chills up my spine, but I tried not to make a conversation about it. First and foremost, I'm a skeptic, so I'm not going to over-dramatize this, so apologize if it isn't that entertaining, but I like to share it. My great-grandmother always said throughout her life that if there was something after death, she would give a sign. She died alone in a nursing home, and after a very long day, we all returned to her family home with her husband, my great-grandfather. We stayed with him that night so that he wasn't alone. Long story short, we all went to bed around midnight. Not long after that, the phone starts ringing. There's no one on the other end. This happens a few times. In the UK, you can dial 1471 to trace the call. The call was untraceable. This happened a few times before it ended. This, as a skeptic, was the first time I'd considered something to be unexplainable. It brought great comfort to my family, so paranormal or not, we like to think that it was my great-grandmother saying this is the only sign I could send, and I'm okay. I have so many stories about this. My whole town is haunted, so haunted that Town Hall hired an investigation crew to come live here, and then dedicated an entire section in our library to the town's paranormal activity. My favorite and most terrifying story is about the fog monsters. We get this Silent Hill-esque fog every now and then, and according to local legend, the silhouettes of figures can be seen when peering into the fog. Most people recount seeing the silhouettes of children and young adults believed to be settlers from the 1700s. There are two figures in particular, though, that earn their own stories. One of them is the quadrupedal hound. They're massive, easily 6 feet tall, standing on all fours. The other seems to be a little girl, but what's notable about her is that only her dress really seems visible. Like you can make out her shape and outline just fine, but looking directly at her limbs or face seemingly makes them disappear while the floating dress stays. Although these figures seem dangerous, there hasn't been any reports of them actually hurting people in my experience. They actually led me home when I was lost one day. I wasn't near them, but there's like a wave of fear that comes over you when you see them that just screams, go the other way. While I was lost, they seemed to group up and completely block off the roads, standing still just staring at me. I got home by just going down whichever road they weren't on. So in a sense, they seem pretty malevolent, but they might just have a strong sense of community, as I do live where they did. Back to the two special figures though, there's a legend of the girl visiting you in your dreams, mostly appearing in the dreams of children. She beckons you into the woods to play with her. When you wake up, you get a strong urge to go back to the place she takes you in your dream, but apparently nobody who returned to the woods while awake has returned. A lot of people who dreamed of her reported that they're seen her commune with animals and has sometimes been seen with the quadruped. That leads me to believe that the quadruped is actually this lady's pet. Maybe not, but it's in my head canon for these guys. But these aren't what all the stories here are about. As an example, we have trails out in our woods for four-wheeling and dirt bikes. Sometimes while walking down one, the path straightens where it shouldn't and eventually leads to an opening in the woods. In the opening is a small cabin, a garden, and a sort of berry farm, like the kind that's in a dugout pit and gets filled with water for an easy harvest. Legend says that a witch lives in the cabin, but the place is a difficult thing to find. As a child, I tried mapping out all of the woods here to find it, but have only ever been there twice, and both times were by accident. Anyway, this is from the town of Chester, New Hampshire. I can't say for certain that you'll encounter anything if you come here, but almost all of the residents have. Check out the library sometime if you're in the neighborhood. One day, I was alone in the backyard at my boyfriend's house, swinging on the porch swing, when I saw his black lab slowly walking towards me. Eventually, she made her way to me and sat down right in front of my leg, so I stopped swinging. She looked me in the eyes, and all of a sudden, I got this overwhelming feeling that she was going to die. She seemed sad, a little scared and confused. I got the feeling that she needed comfort and reassurance. So I sat there with her and stroked her ears and fur, telling her how good she was and that everything would be okay, telling her that she was loved and not to be afraid. After a few minutes, she seemed to feel better and began to wander off again. I told my boyfriend that he needed to pet his girl and give her kisses, and he did. I didn't fill him in on my experience with her just moments before. The next day he called me crying. His mother had accidentally ran over his dog when she was backing out of the garage, and unfortunately she was so injured that they decided to put her down. This isn't the first time this kind of thing happened to me, and it has happened to me with people too. I don't know why I can sense others' deaths, and don't really know what to do with this kind of info. His dog's death struck a chord with me, though, because she was young and healthy, and she sensed her death coming too. Most animals and people are surprised by their endings, that I've witnessed anyway. My grandmother passed away when I was 14. Shortly after, I was home alone walking through the family room. My grandmother always wore a specific perfume, and I've always been super sensitive to smell, so when I caught a whiff of it as I was walking, I immediately associated it with her. I think she was checking in on me. I was the only one in the house beside my dog, but he wasn't the type to get into things, and we didn't have anything that smelled like that in our home. Also, I had a coworker pass away a couple of years ago. The coworker was part of a family who all worked at the restaurant together. A few times in the months after her passing, one of the fryer baskets would just drop randomly without anyone even being near it. My manager and I figured that it was my coworker letting us know she was still around. I dreamed that my dad died, and I was the one having to tell my sister. I found my father dead in his house the next day. I had to tell it to my sister. When I was much younger, we moved to a unit in an apartment complex which my dad had bought. Nothing much, but it was a cold apartment. We lived in South India at the time, and well, we wrote it off as the balcony facing south and the corner unit acting as a draft for the northward monsoon winds, but we couldn't write everything off. It was crazy. I had a series of sleep paralysis episodes. My brother had severe asthma. My parents were always fighting with both of them being violent, and we had my aunt and uncle visit more than once to peacekeep. I always saw a thin shadow guy out of the corner of my vision, and my parents lost all of their money, and we were nearly homeless. The craziest thing that made me doubt anything was not natural was once we had this maid lady who came to clean that house that kept insisting to my mom that something wasn't proper at this house, something was amiss, etc. She said she was a seer or a medium of some sort, and that she'd do a small prayer. This involves lighting a camphor on top of a lemon and basically holding it and drawing 3 circles around us when she said her prayers. She did it for each of the family members without incident. I was the last to go. She lit the camphor and placed it on the lemon and starts. When she started her second circle, the camphor rolled off the lemon. No big deal, she'll get it back on. Except when she went to pick it up, the camphor, which was still burning, rolled away from her. So she went to pick it up once it completely stopped rolling and it was still. She held the lemon on one side and her hand around the camphor to scoop it onto the lemon, but it rolled away, dodging her hand in a zigzag pattern. By now all of us were freaked. Another 2 to 3 more times, she was finally able to scoop it up. She continued her prayer, and before completing her third circle, she fainted, and the camphor stops burning. I caught her, and we got her water and some soda. We gave her a glass of coffee too once she was up. She refused to look me in the eye and refused to return to the house. We ran into significant financial and health troubles after this. We couldn't get another buyer, and also came to know that the guy who sold it to us attempted suicide soon after moving out due to financial trouble. He recovered. We moved away from the unit to another unit in the same apartment after a year or so, and despite selling it at a loss, we couldn't recover financially and even health-wise for over 5 years afterwards. I met her on the street when I was an adult. She approached me and told me she was glad I was okay. She seemed genuinely surprised to see me and looked me in the eye. So all's well, I guess.
What's the creepiest, most blood-chilling story from your hometown? We had this woman alcoholic who used to walk around going to various pubs and shops just getting constantly wasted. Then this guy used to go in and pay all her debts. It was known he'd make a daily visit, and the landlords were always honest about her tab. Anyway, this went on for years. She eventually died. I moved away and kind of forgot about it, but recently found out they used to be married in some freak accident that she was partially responsible for their only child dying. She just lived in a constant depression, just drinking herself to death. He basically loved her, but couldn't help her other than financially. Makes me really sad to think of what they went through. A 2-year-old got eaten by a coyote. The mom looked away for a minute and the kid just got dragged away. My mom said there was a news article that said the mom could hear the child screaming, but the brush was so thick she couldn't get to him. Parents in the area are still really cautious about little kids, and there are signs about coyotes everywhere around the parks. I worked as a guard in our local jail for a couple of years. We had this old guy named Thurman who used to get arrested a lot. He only had one leg and he'd roll his wheelchair out into intersections to bang on your window and beg for money while you were stopped at a red light. If you didn't pay up, he'd try to break your window. We kept Thurman in a cell off to the side by himself. Not like solitary confinement or anything, just to make sure the other inmates didn't try to take advantage of him. He could still use the phone and watch TV and stuff. He was pretty chill as long as you weren't an asshole to him. Everyone thought him to be a harmless old man. Thurman would scream at night in his sleep. All night, you'd hear him howling, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Lord, please forgive me what I've done." He never seemed to remember doing it if you asked him about it. I looked him up one day and found out he had allegedly chopped some woman up with a machete back when he was younger and had both legs. It was apparently a very grisly thing, but they didn't have enough evidence to convict him.
The last time he got arrested before I quit that job, he had swung at a woman in her car with a machete at the intersection he always begs at. We had a guy that owned a pig farm. He killed prostitutes and fed them to his pigs. He had a yearly pig roast before he got caught. Many in town ate his pigs. Robert Picton. Some guy had an obsession with Wolverine and slaughtered his parents with his 4-year-old sister Wolverine style. He ran away and hanged himself in the woods. I'm from a small town where stuff like this is very uncommon, so it was a huge shock to everyone. The janitor at my local Catholic church/school brutally stabbed a priest like 30 times over the fact that the priest was beginning to run background checks on all employees. Had not been done years prior upon initial employment. The janitor had been employed for like 20 years. He turned out to have a decades-old warrant out for pedophilia and sex assault, and was living under a fake identity, had a family and kids, etc., and knew the priest was going to find out. He was also the one who was sent to figure out why the priest didn't show for morning mass the next day. He attempted CPR and then promptly faked chest pain and was taken to the hospital. Eventually, they sorted out what happened and they got a hospital confession from him. Totally wild thing to happen in a small, quiet bedroom community outside of New York City. Shroyer is a ghost town near my hometown, and it was abandoned because people were making a dam and the town was in the way. A certain family that lived in the back roads of Shroyer where you could visit them from leaving my town. Well, it was a farm family in which there was the mother, the father, and son. For whatever reason, the father would shackle the son down in the storm cellar where he would whip, burn, and generally harm the son for hours and then leave him for nights. The mom was simply complacent. After a few years, this came a day where after the father had gotten done and went into the house for the night, the son, not being able to do a whole lot, waited a while, and after years of wear and tear, one of the shackles came loose. He used this to fully break free, and you know what he did? He immediately went for the wood chopping axe and murdered his father and mother, and then burned the farm down. The farm is now seen as being haunted. A young man drove from his college one night back to my hometown, snuck into his parents' house, and chopped them up with an axe. He then drove back to his school like nothing had happened. The following morning, the father wakes up to his alarm and goes about his morning routine, shaving, getting the newspaper from outside, even paying a parking ticket that his son got. He then died on the floor of his kitchen after too much blood loss. They found his blood all over the house. Miraculously, the mother survived with some trauma and major disfigurement. She would go on to claim her son's innocence, even though she admitted that it was her son when first asked by the police. He is now serving life in prison. About 10 years ago, 2 girls, teenagers I believe, were chopped into pieces and scattered around the whole town or city. One piece was found in my primary school bush. I was 7 to 10 years old at the moment. Pretty disturbing that was. The recently married and first-time father band teacher for 7th to 12th grade was outed by his coworker for having a relationship with his 14-year-old student. What was chilling for me was that I spent quite a lot of time alone with him, and he used to give me advice and check on me often, as I was one of those kids teachers were always asked to keep their eye on because I had some issues. And a few of my friends pursued music-related careers because of this man. He committed suicide before the sentencing, and anyone I know who knew him never mentioned him or high school band at all. A guy who had a wife and a daughter. He murdered both of them in the basement of his house and then killed himself because they didn't want to convert to his religion. Rumors are going around that the house is extremely haunted, and I believe it because my friend at the time explored the house and took a selfie while a tall black figure in the background was just chilling there. I always get weird vibes from that house. A woman named Kelly Sue Ackernecht disappeared after her night shift at the pharmacy, and no one has seen her since. Her car was found burning in a wooded part of town, but she wasn't in it. There are no suspects. Lots of locals think it was her husband, and no persons of interest. My mom and husband both worked with her at a previous job. A murderer was feeding human remains to his pigs about a half hour from my town. Also, at my hometown, a serial killer just recently was dismembering women and throwing their severed limbs out of his car or leaving them in public places like parks.
Also, at my hometown, a teenage girl last year or so was discovered hanging by her neck behind the high school. She was naked and almost unrecognizably mutilated. A girl from my neighborhood was found murdered. Turns out she was the victim of a serial killer. The bastard finally died in prison a few years ago. She was a great kid with brothers and mom who were devastated. In my town, about 40 years ago, a girl named Tara Calico was kidnapped, raped, and murdered. The body was never found, and all we have to go off of are some deathbed confessions from heroin addicts. I'm from a small town. A washing machine broke down at a laundrette once. The machine stopped halfway through a cycle. It was awful, just unimaginably awful. This always comes to mind. There was a satanic ritual in a hotel that ended with the partial beheading of 2 women. A man and his girlfriend, with their friend, decided to meet up for some casual human sacrifice. The plan was for them to take a bunch of drugs. Then he was going to strangle both of the women and then decapitate them and finally kill himself. His girlfriend even began to struggle and tell him no, but he continued to nearly cut her head off anyway. Mary said no and began to struggle. She was scared, Curry said. He twisted her neck and he heard a snap, but she was still breathing. So he got a knife and he began cutting her neck, but she was still saying no. Satan worshiper guilty of murdering 2 women. What's a horrifying, creepy experience you have lived through? Serious. When I was maybe 19 or 20, I nearly got run off the road on my way home from work one night. No actual accident, but it shook me up, so I pulled off onto the shoulder to calm down before continuing to drive. A windowless van pulled up behind me and a man got out and approached my car. He asked if I was okay, and I told him I was fine, just gathering myself after a scare. He offered for me to wait in the van with his wife and kids. He insisted multiple times that I get in his van. Luckily, my door was already locked and I'd only cracked the window to speak with him. Since he parked his van right behind me and I could see in my rear view, there were no visible passengers in his van. One night in college, I heard a woman screaming for help. I looked out my window and saw her right next to the street. Keep in mind, this is a popular college town, and the street was busy, and there didn't seem to be anything immediately attacking or endangering her. After a few minutes, I was about to go down when a car pulled up and 3 guys got out. I could overhear the convo since it was right out of my bedroom, but she said no one was paying attention and they should try some other apartment. They all jumped in and drove off. A month later, an apartment got broken into and 4 people were caught, 1 woman and 3 men. Apparently, she was in the house and left the door unlocked, and the men then came in and robbed the place. I was once at my girlfriend's townhouse, and they had a backyard with a shared fence with a family or a group of families. It was dark at night, but one of those nights when the light of the town reflects off of the clouds so it's eerily light out. The fence between the townhome and the family house was old and worn out, so you could see through the gaps if you really focused. We heard a blood-curdling scream, "No!" followed by an immediate soul-crushing inhale. There was probably 50 feet between the glass sliding door we were at and the fence. They had their floodlights on, and it illuminated the silhouettes of the parents crying. Peering through the fence 50 feet away, you could see a body swaying from the tree. Their son had hung himself and discovered it in the dead of night when their dog ran out to the backyard and activated the floodlights. We could only see through the small gaps in the fence and the shadows of the family experiencing it in real time. Still gives me chills every time I think about it. I was driving home from Target at around 8 p.m. at night and got the feeling the car behind me was following me. I started taking a very weird, circuitous way, and they stayed behind me, not tailgating, but close enough to not lose me. Finally, they turned and I breathed a sigh of relief until I turned on a side street, saw an idling car with its lights off, and the headlights came on, and they started following me again. I was freaking out and drove as fast as I safely could to the small town police station. When they saw me turn into the parking lot, they sped off. I sat there until my adrenaline calmed down a bit, and then I drove home and promptly burst into tears. Closest I've ever come to living out a horror movie. After getting evicted from our apartment, my sister and I lived in a station wagon with our mom for almost a month. One night, we were parked in a lot kind of hidden behind some dumpsters. It was just my sister and me trying to sleep when we woke up to someone tapping on the window. It was an old man with a scraggly beard and these wet lesions all over his face. He smiled at us and told us in this raspy voice, "Hey, roll down the window." In the dim light from the street lamp, he looked like a demon pressing his face against the window glass. We shook our heads and held each other as he went around the station wagon, checking each door to see if it would open. Eventually, he came back to the rear, and this time he wasn't smiling, but looking really angry and demented. He started slamming on the back window and telling us to open the fucking window, you fucking cunts. I remember being terrified that he was going to break the glass with his fists. He suddenly stopped and walked away when an SUV pulled in and shone its headlights on him. I don't know if it was a cop or a security guard or just someone driving by, but it was enough to scare him away. My sister and I jumped out of the car as the SUV pulled away. We went to the laundromat and sat in there for the rest of the night. When I was 19, I was 7 months pregnant with my oldest daughter. I still lived with my parents and came home after work around 11:30 p.m. I usually checked that the vehicles were locked before going inside, but this night I was overcome with a sense of immense fear. I wouldn't even look toward my parents' vehicles and hurried into the house. 20 minutes later, a guy's knocking on our door, telling us that my parents' SUV was on fire and to get out of the house, saving our lives, and we called 911. There was a serial arsonist on the loose in our town, and when he was caught and he confessed, he admitted to watching me come home that night and how he was preparing to hurt me in case I had caught him, but I never looked over his direction as he was sitting in my parents' SUV when I had arrived home. It took years before I was able to be out at night alone. I've seen a lot since I used to live in a bad part of town, but the one that really stood out was when one of the wiremen was literally burnt into a crisp. We were at the church next door, which was at the second floor and had a big window. From the back, you could see the wireman doing something, but then suddenly he grabbed a hold of a live wire. He tensed up, started shaking, and he couldn't let go. People tried getting him down using wooden sticks, but it only caused him to fall down, still clinging on the live wire. I didn't see anything else after him falling down, but our neighbor said his clothes were burnt off and he was literally charred and unrecognizable. It's more creepy than horrifying. This was right after the mass Las Vegas shooting. I was at my sister's keeping her company. Her husband was out of town and we had her 2 young children. We were talking about the shooting and how probably a lot of people don't run away at the start of a mass shooting because gunfire in real life doesn't sound like it does on TV. At that very moment, we heard this bang, 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 and I thought it was someone trying to kick in her door. We took the kids to the bedroom and hit the panic button on her security system. It wasn't someone trying to kick in the door. Someone had shot through her front door. I was home alone for the weekend when I was in high school, which was exciting for me as I never really had the house to myself ever. I had a few people over that Friday night and got hammered. Then the next night it was just me home alone in my house. I had a case of beers left over and had a movie to watch, so I decided that the hangover would not keep me down and to party by myself and have an awesome night. I ended up getting way too drunk and felt hungry. I decided to cook a mad feed and started whipping up a pasta in a drunken slur. I was singing like a maniac while I played Master Chef in my kitchen, thinking I was top shit. Halfway through singing and stirring the pasta sauce, I hear a tapping sound and some movement in the corner of my eye catches my attention. One of the metal chain ropes used to pull the blinds up and down on the glass door was moving and hitting the glass door, making a tapping sound. I froze as I watched it moving back and forth by itself. Then my focus kind of zoomed out as I realized that that was not the only metal blind rope that was moving. We have around 7 sets of blinds on the glass doors, and all 7 of the ropes were moving back and forth. My hairs stood up and I walked out of the kitchen as all of them were tapping on the glass doors. No windows or doors in the house were open, and they were picking up momentum, with the tapping becoming louder and more frequently. I turned around just in time to see the DVD case of the movie I was watching slide off the TV cabinet on its own. I let out a slurred, "Fork that," and went to bolt outside, just freaking out. On the way out, I saw the painting next to the front door. It had been moved and was tilted. I let out a gasp. I ran out the door and wet myself just a little in the process. Shit was real. The horror was real. This was real. Outside, I was so distraught and horrified at what had just happened My house was haunted. There was a fucking ghost, and it was fucking with me. It didn't like me. I realized that I had left the stove on and that I needed to leave, but needed to grab my phone to call someone and get out of there. I decided I would go to the park and try to contact a friend. So I psyched myself up, ran into the house, turned off the stove, shitting myself, ran into my room, grabbed the key, my phone, and 10 beers. I headed to the park and started drinking again. No one picked up, as everyone was wiped out from the night before. Cut to a long story short, I vaguely remember being at the park before I blacked out, then in my kitchen crying at some point, then blank. The next day I woke up in my bed. I wondered whether it was just a dream, but I walked out and saw the pasta and DVD case and realized that it was legit. I realized that I had to break the news to my family later that day that our house was haunted and that we would have to move. I went on Facebook, and that's when I saw status after status saying that there had been minor earthquake during the night. Needless to say, I felt like a hungover idiot, but the truth is, that was the first earthquake I had experienced, and we don't get earthquakes where I live, or not usually, at least. Nothing to do with paranormal or anything, but it was an experience I had while living with my father, who is a recovering hardcore alcoholic. My whole life, knowing him, he's been on hard liquor and had trouble quitting. He would often get into rehab, and I'd be sent off to different caretakers. Some were pretty abusive. So in an attempt to keep me from being sent back to the abusers, he tried quitting without rehab. He also worked at a Salvation Army, so if he got caught drinking, he'd be fired or something like that. He lied a lot, so I never bothered asking. This was the first time I ever seen someone have serious withdrawals and didn't understand what was happening at the time. The first stage, we were eating at an event held by the Salvation Army with other recovering addicts, and he couldn't get the food into his mouth. His hands were shaking so bad, he just left his food alone after several attempts. He was very irritable while sober, and it only got worse. The second stage, I was woken by him talking to the neighbors for a very long time. He had a full-blown conversation, but nobody was there. I rolled over and asked him who he was talking to, and he said Carol, who was our next-door neighbor. At first I thought he was on the phone, but he wasn't. The third stage was by far one of the worst. We were sitting outside late at night by the apartment swimming pool, and my dad was looking at the trees. I said, "Do you see them?" "See what?" I asked. "The bobcats in the trees." He was literally having hallucinations and was serious about it. He saw other stuff too, but that's all I remembered out of it. The final straw was one day he decided to hop on my bike to grab something from the store one morning. He made it about 20 feet from the front door on the bike and fell over and knocked himself out cold on some stairs. I was too scared to come outside. Residents of the complex helped him out. He was totally out of it. He had no idea what was going on. I was only 15 and never seen my dad act this way or get hurt even. He was a mathematical genius and electrician journeyman, and seeing him go through all of this was horrific. He was sent to the hospital for a long time, and I had to stay with a friend. My dad kept drinking after that and ended up passing away 7 years later from liver and kidney failure. When I was about 6, my parents dropped me off at this swimming lesson class. Now, this was back in China over 2 decades ago. I remember the class had a lot of students. Anyway, I was scared of the water and didn't want to go in, and the teacher got frustrated and just tossed me in the deep end. To this day, I remember clearly the panic I felt, the sheer fear as I choked and gagged on the pool water as I sunk lower and lower. It felt like ages before the teacher shoved a long pole into the pool for me to grab onto to pull me out. I remember the sensation of panic and edges of my vision getting dark. For several years after, I was so terrified of water going over my face that I had trouble showering and washing my hair. I had to force myself to take a deep breath, go under the water and scrub as fast as I can, and step out. Every time my heart would go crazy and I would be on the edge of a panic attack. Anyways, it wasn't till I was in my mid-20s that this even came up during a family visit, and my grandmother told me that when my grandpa found out, he got so mad, he called in favors from his army buddies, literally old revolutionary soldiers from Mao's days, to go in there with high-ranking government officials to scare the fuck out of that swimming school teacher. This happened just a few weeks ago, and maybe it will get better with time, but I literally watched my mom die. She was on hospice care for multiple medical issues, But the major thing was she had a stroke, leaving her paralyzed and kept developing pneumonia. Back in October, she was sent home from the hospital and we were told that medication was no longer working to treat it and that she shouldn't be brought back in for it. Fast forward to the Sunday before Thanksgiving, and she was sent to the ER for a basic procedure that home health just couldn't do. So, she gets to the hospital and they run tests, and everything that could be wrong is high potassium, signs of heart failure, signs of liver and kidney failure. They told us she wouldn't make it through the night. We knew my mom wanted to die at home, but the doctors didn't think she would survive the EMS ride back. Her PCP, which is the greatest doctor ever, personally came in without anyone asking, had the ER do a few things, and they agreed she was stable enough to be sent home. Hospice came that night, and my mom did okay for a few days, but then went downhill fast. My dad asked me to stay with him, and luckily I was working remote. On December 3rd, I woke up having a panic attack. I don't remember a dream or anything, and I just knew that was the last day we'd have her. She was doing okay that morning, but was in a steady decline. We were giving her big morphine doses and doing our best, but she just couldn't breathe. She sounded funny, almost like she was snoring, but her oxygen and heart rate was fine. My dad went to check on her 5 minutes later, and I was in there too. At first, we thought everything was okay, but then her pulse was really low teens and her oxygen dropped to 10. My dad held her and told her it was okay to let go, and her eyes opened and stared directly at me. The campus house that I lived in had a pretty fucked up history. Suicides took place there, previous owners died, and it was old as hell. I stayed there all summer alone because of my job in my college's city, and legit every night I'd hear shit. Before I'd chalk it up to one of my 4 other roommates making noise, but now I was alone. I pretty much heard weird shit almost every night. The first day I got there, I went upstairs to my room, and the second I reached the top of the stairs, I heard a door slam downstairs. Throughout the summer, I heard footsteps, doors, and a bunch of other shit. I was almost sure, still think this today, that there was a squatter who somehow avoided me all summer. There were days when the front door would be unlocked in the morning where I vividly remember looking at it at night. I'd say to myself, okay, here I am locking the door, and give it a few tugs to make sure it was locked and it'd be open come morning. Maintenance usually let themselves in periodically, but I'd call them up and they'd say they hadn't been there. The creepiest one was the door that led up to the attic. It was a regular door, not one of those pull-down ones. Some days, it'd be slightly open and I'd pull on it closed, but it wouldn't open by itself. I'd close it, put a chair in front of it, but it'd still be slightly open. My roommate came down one weekend that I happened to be gone, and he said he heard a lot of banging as well throughout the night. One day, I straight up yelled, "If there's anyone squatting here, I literally do not care, and you can stay, but let me know you're here and we could set up some simple ground rules. I'm chill." I thought I heard some rustling from the basement, but nothing ever happened. Funny part is, if there was a squatter, I wouldn't have cared too much. It's the college's house, so if someone wanted to be my roommate for the summer, I would have been totally okay with it as long as they weren't a psycho. 18 years ago, I was flatting with someone. She had a trip she went on, which left me in the house by myself. I woke up in the middle of the night. It was almost pitch black, and I looked over and saw someone in my room. I had a huge dose of adrenaline, and I tried to yell out in the toughest voice I could, "Who are you?" But I was half asleep, and it came out like a pirate, "Ooh-ar." It sounds funny to type that, but in the moment it was terrifying. I rolled over in my double bed to gain about 10 inches of distance between us and tried again. "Who are you?" But again I said, "Ooh-ar." At this point I realized any attempt at sounding like a tough guy had just gone out the window, and the panic was rising, until I woke up a little bit more and realized I was yelling at my towel that I draped on my computer chair. I find it hilarious now, but at the time, it was horrifying.